this joint special meeting of the Mayor and City Council of the City of San Bernardino, the Mayor and City Council of the City of San Bernardino acting as the successor agency to the City of San Bernardino, to the redevelopment agency. Before we get started, I'll ask the City Clerk if you'd lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone who's here to participate in this budget workshop, and especially like to thank staff for all of their hard work. And at this time, we'll turn the review over to our city manager.
Thank you. I'm waiting for this to come on. Can you hear me? There we go. For my next song. I'm going to do a little room adjustment here. The better part of the view is going to be on this side of the room, if you'd like to move, or even in the front row. Nobody's sitting in the front row yet, so that'll work really well. I'm going to make just a few comments. Actually, I'll probably carry on for a little bit, but I do want to kick off what we're doing today and give an overview, and then we're going to have Brent and Dixon, who's hiding in the back, and Maya, and they're going to go through each of the individual department budgets, and department heads will be available to answer your questions when we get to any specific department. What I want to do first of all is explain to the public that this is the first budget workshop for this next fiscal year budget. We will have additional opportunity for discussion with the City Council, and in fact we're scheduled to do a formal budget public hearing on June 7th, I believe. Is that correct? So that's what our plan is. The formal budget meeting will be on June 7th. And then adoption would be a couple weeks later. So that's the plan. If the City Council at some point decides that you want us to provide additional opportunity for the public for outreach on the budget, let us know. Staff is willing to hold whatever number of community meetings to talk about the budget that you want. My experience on those is that you don't get a lot of input, but I'm happy to get whatever input the public may have. The CIP workshop, today we're going to deal with the operating budget. The CIP workshop will be as soon as we can get another workshop date. We're still working on that. We're about a week or 10 days away from having that wrapped up. And so we'll follow this up with the CIP workshop. And there's a lot to talk about under the CIP budget. So in many ways, it's more difficult than what we're going to talk about today. The budget that we're presenting is in conformance with the city's bankruptcy plan. So as we have gone along talking to the court, making our plans, and they've been reviewing that. We've been committing ourselves to certain expenditures and certain limitations. This budget that we're providing you is in conformance with that plan. It gets a little tricky on the police staffing, and when we get to the police department, we'll talk about that a little bit, but we are budgeting at the 260 officer level, which is in conformance with the plan. We're actually using some of that money for other purposes only because we couldn't fill 260 positions in the next 12 months if we wanted to. It's too hard to do that this fast. It's too many new people, too many people in academy, too many people in training. So we can't get to the full 260. So we are going to use some of that funding for other, like police vehicles, for instance. And I think you'll see that that makes sense. But the plan is still to get to those higher levels, even higher than that, in police staffing over the next few years. The budget includes certain adjustments in staffing that conform with the charter, the new charter. So, for instance, the sewer collection function is now transferred to the water department for council action at the last meeting. And those positions are out of this budget. There are some impacts from that that we'll cover later on. Business license function is transferring from the city clerk's office into finance. The civil service function is changing. The civil service board will become a personnel commission, and the staffing will be moving to the human, well, actually they'll be moving with Rebecca Kramer into the city manager's office, and they'll be doing the recruitment work as well as grievance management. Not under the guidance of the personnel commission, it's under the city manager's authority on the recruitment part of it, but the staffing will be done by Rebecca Kramer and her staff out of the manager's office. The city treasurer function will move to finance. I met with Mr. Kennedy last week just for transitional discussion, and he is continuing to be the manager of the city's investment portfolio. Our portfolio, as you may have noted, is very modestly, conservatively invested, but there is a certain amount of day-to-day management that is required of that. Maybe not day-to-day, but certainly week-to-week. And he's going to work with Brent Mason, and we will transfer that as we're in a situation where we can do that. Mr. Kennedy has agreed to continue to do that until we can make that transfer. He's still on payroll, so this is an appropriate relationship. So those are the major charter-related changes to the budget. The budget itself doesn't include, there is no way for me to stand and not block people's view. The budget doesn't include very much new spending. We just don't have the resources to do a lot of new. You will see on the whiteboard, if you can ever get into a position to read it, you can see that these are the items above the line. So in other words, these are the items that are in the budget that you've received from us. Below the line in red are items that we wish we could put in the budget, but we just don't have enough funding to do everything we'd like to. There's some down here that I feel really bad are not up above the line. You know, commercial code enforcement, that's just an example that community development asked for. Well, we could use those positions. We don't have enough money to do everything, so that didn't make it above, but all of these are subject to council review. You have the authority to put them up, but if you do, we got to move something else down because it just barely balances as it is. Over here for later discussion, I just put a list of potential revenue sources that we can have a discussion about. It's not part of that review, but I put it on the board because last year we ended up talking about these and I thought I'd do it again. There are certain assumptions about what's in this budget that it's important for you to understand. And I'm going to go through these because of that. Within the budget, we assume a 2% salary COLA for the city employees other than POA. And that's in the bankruptcy plan. That's what we have budgeted, and that's what the MOUs, the previous MOUs, would have called for. We're still negotiating new MOUs with a couple of the groups. But it's a 2% salary COLA that is included in the budget. For the POA, there's a guaranteed 3.5%. So that is in the budget that you have been given. Sales tax, we're making an assumption of a 3.4% increase in sales tax. That comes from our sales tax auditor, and they're pretty close usually. We wish it were more, but frankly, Other cities these days are starting to project sales tax almost down, flat to down, as they're going out into future years. The reason for that is internet sales have so much affected point of sales that internet revenues are going down. Secondly, there's the switch to this service economy where so much of what we pay for these days doesn't have sales tax attached to it. So sales tax is going down for that reason as well. So sales tax trends are not positive for cities. In fact, there's a lot of talk in the League of California Cities in Sacramento about what the future of cities are going to be if sales tax continues to decline. There's a lot of services, for instance, that are not taxed in California, and they talk about whether someday we should start doing that. That's a Sacramento decision. For our purposes, this year, 3.4% sales tax increase. Our property tax, you will recall that our primary property tax goes to the county as part of the fire annexation. There's a second level, second chunk of property tax that's called the VLF in lieu property tax. And you probably remember that's a long story as to how the Sacramento negotiated that years ago in order to do a debt service that they wanted to do. And it was imposed upon cities. So we get half of our property tax in this chunk called VLF, property tax, vehicle license fee property tax. We get, under the annexation, we got about 65%, and the county fire got 35%. Now, over time, we think as that grows, then that percentage gets more favorable for us. In other words, as it grows, we may get to 75-25, for instance. For this year, the good news is this number is actually going up $2 million more than we would have expected a year ago at this time. Is that correct? Brent can get into much more detail on that. So that's good news. We have this extra money in that category. That's good news because the CalPERS assumption, as this council is well aware, because we've talked about it so much during the bankruptcy process, our PERS cost, CalPERS cost, is projected up $5.6 million, and it gets worse every year going out. So this is a major chunk and a major hit to our budget, but it's not a surprise to us. We have known this for some time. When other cities are talking about this, as they did at this conference that Councilmember Mulvihill attended last week, other cities are so completely stumped by what they're going to do to deal with this. We've been through that. So for once, we have an advantage in that we have already brought our organization down to where we've got a plan that covers our CalPERS cost increases, horrible though it may be. Within this budget, when you do a budget, you put everything in the budget and assume that it's all filled for 12 months. And you know that everything's not going to be filled for 12 months. New positions, for instance, aren't even filled by July 1. So there's a certain amount of money every year in a budget that doesn't get spent, and you know it's not going to get spent. And rather than cut things out because your budget says it doesn't balance otherwise, most cities will apply a credit number within their budget for that amount of money that you know you're not going to spend. So what we assume in our budget is a 2.5% of salary credit that goes into the budget to keep us from, to really recognize the revenue we're really going to have. So that's just one of those budget assumptions that you do when you go through a budget.
What does that equal, Mark?
It comes out to about the same as the 2.5. So the base must be a little more than 100 million. Debt service is down 400,000 this year compared to last year. That was budgeted last year. So that's a good thing. It's not a surprise because our debt service is all scheduled and all, but this is lower than it was last year's budget, so our budget looks better by that amount. I put this up here, and I don't want people to misunderstand this. we've been getting funded. Mr. Charette and I have been working on this along with Chief Burgoyne. We've been getting funded from San Manuel for some time for police services. And the funding assumed that officers would be stationed in the area of the casino. And we can't do that. We haven't had enough officers to be able to do that. So last year we quit filing for that reimbursement. So it's $800,000 less in the revenue assumption this year in our budget. But the reality is we stopped filing for that last year. So it's a difference in the budget, but it actually is something we've already accustomed ourselves to in actual operations. It will be great if someday we can actually assign full-time officer presence in that area. I am sure they would be okay. They would be happy to go back to doing it again. And in fact, I want to make sure they don't get blamed. They didn't pull the rug out on us on this. We can't provide what the contract called for, so we have quit asking for it. It's just, we contracted for it. We can't provide it, so there's no way we can ask them to pay for it. When we get fully staffed at the full bankruptcy plan staffing, we'll be back talking to them, and I suspect they'll be back funding that in the future. I want to make sure they don't get blamed for this. They didn't do anything wrong. They've been very generous with this. Telephone costs are down in this year's budget. We're putting in a new phone system as part of the move. That will save us considerable money. The new facility leases, because of the move, will cost us money. That's $1.2 million for the leases. The electrical cost, because we're going to be shutting down City Hall, which is a very inefficient building, will save $350,000. So we've got $170 to the good, $350 to the good, and we've got $1.2 million up because of the leases. I've already covered that this assumes the charter transfers, and there's a number, $500,000, that relates to the merit increases that our employees get. Remember, last year we unfroze those, and they weren't in the base. So as we give those, we have to build that base up. There will come a time when this doesn't show up anymore because it'll all show up in the base. But it doesn't show up in the base yet, so we put another $500,000 in the budget you've got. And you'll see that under general government, non-departmental. So those are the major assumptions that went into building this budget. We'll go through all of the items that are on this board that are adds as we do the departmental reviews, and Brent and Dixon will take you through that. The other thing that's on the board are things that people asked for that we haven't been able to put above the line. We just don't have enough money to put it above the line. I would point to somebody might look at this and say, gee, there's not that much that we didn't fund. Yeah, there's a lot we didn't fund. First of all, because the departments don't ask for much because they're already used to the fact we don't have much funding. And secondly, if you look at these three things right here alone, field equipment, maintenance, staffing, vacant property maintenance, and relating to public works, that could be millions of dollars more to deal with a city our size. We're working on a shoestring as it relates to maintenance, staffing, the equipment they use, and the vacant property that needs to be maintained. We're way underfunded on this. And then add parks and recreation staff, how underfunded we are there, add library, add IT, government buildings. I mean, we have dramatic amounts of money that we would need to be able to fund this operation as much as we want. We know we can't do that. We have to live within our means. When we did this budget, the philosophy we had to take, and I think the right philosophy, is that we're rebuilding this organization, and we're building the foundation first. I shared with you an email this weekend that talked about the conference Jim went to, where Greg Devereaux was asked a question about when he came to work at the county. The county was in something of a mess, and they said to him, So what did you do when you got there? How did you approach that task that you had? And Greg said, first we had to solidify the base. We had to fix the foundation of the county government. And so we did that. That means putting the right people into the jobs. You have to have the right talent to be able to manage a function like that. And you have to have the right systems in place to deal with the workload that you've got. If you don't have the right systems in place, and as you know, we don't here, then certain things happen. You end up chasing today's emergency. Whatever, it's the squeaky wheel philosophy on how to get work done. And we might be out over here fixing something, and then down over here, and then up here, and down here. It's not the right way to run an operation. We need to have systems in place so that we can schedule the workload efficiently. And you get to, for instance, if you're dealing with potholes, you would take your calls, or street lights. You would take the calls you've got, and you would assemble them, and then on a given day you would go out and you would do all of those in that area. On a given day you would go out and deal with your street lights. But before you can do your street lights, you got to have a good inventory of them to know what kinds of problems you've got in what street. So all of those basic foundations, all those basic systems that need to be in place in order to do the work efficiently, they have to be built. And we're doing that. We're trying to do that. Everybody here knows that it's been a problem in this city to get capital projects done. We talk about it, and you've been seeing lists of projects year after year, I think, and yet they don't seem to all get done. That's because we don't have in place today the people and the systems to administer those projects. It's not that hard to do if you get the right people in place. So we're out recruiting right now in Public Works to get professional managers who know how to get projects done, and project administration staff that have the ability to do it. And one of the things we've found here, both in Brent's office and IT, is you put the right manager in at the helm, you find out the staff's actually pretty competent people. Our IT staff is incredible, but they haven't had anybody putting in place a strategy that was a logical, sequential, strategic strategy. Same thing with Brent. His staff has been tremendous, but they needed the leadership, they needed the management tools. So I think we're on the right track. We're making the right decisions. The council has been working on this plan now for some time, and I think we're ready this year to really start implementing and seeing some real progress. And so we'll talk about that more as we go through the departments. So I'm going to, unless you've got questions for me up to this point, I think it's time to turn and start reviewing the report that Brent's got. Jim?
What do you project as being reserves?
Per the bankruptcy plan.
When I presented mid-year to you earlier for the current year, the reserve is projected about $24 million. We don't have, I'm sorry, thank you. It just magically turned on. It has not changed from that point in time, so I'm still projecting 24. It will be something different when the year closes for sure, for the better, for worse. But I was trying to give you a conservative number then, so I still feel comfortable as I sit here today that the number projected at mid-year will at least be the number we have come June 30.
Okay. And another comment that I have. Looking at the document that we have in front of us here, and we're going to see some presentations here, but this document means nothing to me.
Right.
It's all numbers.
Well, that's why I sent that email.
Yeah.
I hope you read the email.
I read the email.
Yes.
I read the email. And we're going to have presentations here. I'd really like to get a written summary of whatever's going to be said. It'd be nice to go back and to review to better understand. This document, we're getting bullet points, not really a continuous narrative.
Yeah.
And I just, we're supposed to be policymakers here, and no criticism, but this an accountant would be great with this. I mean, this is just something to fawn over. To me, it means nothing. I mean,
Well, let me-
we got thousands and thousands of numbers here. And if what kind of policy am I going to create for this? Well, we got some bullet points here. But after this is all said and done, I'd really like to get some continuous narrative discussing just what is taking place here. And
Let me address that. This is the first budget workshop. This is not the final policy. We're not asking you to make any votes on any policies tonight. It's why I sent that long email over the weekend to say just exactly that. My first paragraph says, this is a lot of numbers and it's not going to mean a lot to you at this point. That's why I said it, because that's exactly what you did receive. The other side of that coin is I could have waited and not sent it to you, and then you'd have said, why didn't you send me anything before we had our first budget workshop? So that's what I did. And I sent that long email to tell you what's going on in each of the departments, and I took the time to itemize what we've tried to do and where we're trying to go with each of the departments. The policy decision that a council does with a budget review is the policies that relate to resource allocation. So when we give these to you, what we're really doing is we're telling you the kinds of things we need. And the things that we need in this city are far more than the money we've got. So the policy is, how are you going to decide as a council to allocate the funds between the alternatives? Each department head could give you their reasons why they think the things that they propose ought to be in the budget. And you're going to have a chance to ask those questions of council members, department heads one at a time as we go through this. And we'll spend whatever time you need between now and the day that you vote to make sure you've had a chance to get the input you want. But I could have asked the staff, keep in mind, we got a lot of stuff going on around here, a lot of stuff, and we're moving on top of all of that. And this is the staff.
And we're moving.
You're moving too. This is the staff. This is what you've got. And for me to ask them to do a lot of narrative before we've even had budget discussions, initial discussions with the council, seems to me to be beating my head against the wall for something that really needs to be reflective of what the council's interest is. So that's what we're trying to do, and we certainly don't think that we're giving you everything you need as of right now. But I hope as we go through all of this, you'll ask us questions that will give us an idea where we need to focus to get you what you need to make policy decisions.
I guess, for example, it'd be nice to get a copy of this board. It seems to me a year and a half ago or last year, you had a board here, and you also had a Mason-Dixon line across here like you've got here. And
Yes.
we never got it. I never got it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You had
I sent it out about a week after the meeting. I've got copies of it I can show you.
okay.
But I don't, yeah, that sounds like a complaint to me. I don't know. I'm not sure what the point is. We're trying to get you what you need. And if you will tell us what you need before the June adoption, we're going to bust our butts and try to get it.
This information would be important.
Pardon me?
This information would be important. Just a summary in terms of where we're going to be adding staff and where we'd like to have staff, and again, some of the assumptions.
Yeah, this is a starting point for the council to discuss, so you can tell us whether or not you think these things are more important than these things, or whether anything else that's in the budget is less important than these things. Or maybe there's things we don't even have up here that you want us to do. Then there's the CIP. In the CIP, we don't have enough money there either. And you could conceivably decide we're not doing half of these things and we're going to put it into street paving. I mean, these are the council, this is what's tough about a council job, is you need to make those kinds of trade-offs. And we'll try to show you what the numbers are, but ultimately you're going to have to set the priorities, and we'll try to support that effort. Okay?
Any further questions? Not, we'll...
Yeah, we'll have more questions. Why don't we let Brent start with his PowerPoint, and we'll go from there.
one thing, Councilman Mulvihill, I think, as we work through the departments too, I think what you're looking at that's a painful detail here will also take some more shape as we go through department by department, because largely it's rollover budget, except for the new things we're trying to point out to you on the board here. So with that conversation, I'm hoping that will, when you get done with community development or police or whatever, you'll hear the things we've been doing that are different or the decision points we've been working on, and then from there have comments and discussion too. So okay, we're up. Okay, welcome.
This is going to turn on in just a second. We're still down.
We have a little technical difficulty, just a second. We haven't paid our bills.
That's not true. Not true.
I just wanted to see. So basically, an important thing is to include all the IT requests. Indeed.
It was working this time, was it?
Yeah, it's been working the whole time.
Yeah, it was when you came home.
I apologize too. I got sick over the weekend, so I'll see how long my voice lasts. It could be good if it goes out quickly, because then we're done. Okay, great.
Thank you.
All righty.
What we're looking at here.
Yes, you have the presentations behind you, in front of you on paper, and on the board here, on the monitor here. As a city manager indicated, tonight's focus is on the operating budget. We'll come back and talk about capital in a separate discussion in a couple of weeks, probably.
Point of order, Mayor.
Councilmember Valdivia.
Simply to understand the kind of ground rules, or what is a consensus of council members? Do we ask, when's the appropriate time to ask questions? Is this per department or per slide, or how would you like to, what's best for our staff so that we can also ask questions and interject?
As you have questions, I'd love to entertain them as we go through here.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because then you're covering at that
Yep.
time instead of
Okay.
having to come back.
Very
to
good.
it. So just
Thank you, sir.
I'll go through
our
revenues,
normal council meeting protocol, just
and I'll
get my attention, and we'll...
be going through revenues first, and so maybe talk about revenues generally, and then we'll talk about revenues as a group, and then departments. On the expense side, we'll go department by department then. The general fund budget is balanced with a minor surplus, about $100,000, so essentially right on. Nearly $120 million in revenue and in expenses is what's projected at this point in time in the documents you've been presented. One of the things we worked on this year is more of a right sizing. We've had a lot of organizational changes over the last few years. I've been here 13 months, but over the time I've been here and prior to that, there have been a lot of changes, and so trying to get some of those details in all these pages set properly. We've had a little more chance this year to review in greater detail the minutia, if you will, and try and find where it looks like maybe that line's got a little more money than you might need based on the way things are running now, et cetera. There's been a lot of moving dollars around trying to get them in the right places again, and so that, again, we've had a time this year to do that, and that is kind of been indicative of the process we walked through. There's also been a little minor reorganization, as the city manager talked about. City manager's office is absorbing the civil service department, and finance is absorbing treasurer and business licensing, and then the sewers department's transferred to the water department. The positions as a whole, you'll notice, have gone down. That's primarily because of the sewer folks going away to the water department, and then also we've had fewer fleet positions as a major change to it. As the organization has downsized, fire and refuse gone away, we haven't needed as many there. Then those two changes going the down direction have been offset by a few adds that we'll talk about as we go through. The next page is revenues. You'll notice that's a detail of the $120 million roughly. That compares to the roughly $13 million last year. We're talking about a roughly 3.5% overall increase. The top line where it says other taxes, that's kind of generic. That terminology just comes out of our account system, the way the report goes.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you. Brett, your last slide on page 4.
Yeah.
So I see in city manager there's 18 to now 25, and then if civil service is true, right, I'm trying to do the math here on a city manager uptick of 7 employees, and then the civil service. I thought civil service, so it's going bye-bye and into the city manager for administrative services. So what's other growth do you have there, Mark?
There's actually a page on that, just a few slides.
Oh, is there?
on.
Okay, all right,
So
very
if we
good.
could wait.
On the personnel changes, we'll detail department by department as we go
Okay,
through the departments.
very good,
then.
thank you.
So it's more of a snapshot to see where we're headed. On the revenues page, page 5, I was going to...
Councilman,
Pardon me?
Councilman Nichol has a
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to be clear, is VLF consolidated under property taxes on page 5?
VLF is in, yes, that property taxes line item. That shows $15 million for next year.
Okay, and it's purely VLF?
Yes.
Okay.
In the other taxes line, what that is transit occupancy tax. It's about 80% of that line, so it titles differently that way.
Which one?
The very first line called other
Other
taxes,
taxes?
it's mostly transit occupancy tax for about $4.5 million. And then also another generic-looking one is the miscellaneous for $4.6 million. You'll notice the transfers in line, the very last line, is 0. That was money that came from the sewer fund into the general fund. Because sewer is now part of water, the water transfer is in the miscellaneous line, so those two are combined for next year because it's all going to come from water. And so you kind of take the 3.7 last year plus the 700,000, and they become the 4.6 number. There's some other items in there too, but that's the lion's share of it.
Mayor.
Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Brent, help me out here on number 120, the Measure Z sales tax. I was under the impression we had a little bit more than 8 million for 2017. I thought we had
For
more.
2017,
Yeah,
no,
or
the number I
2018.
showed you at mid-year projected $8 million.
Okay, so this is pretty much...
Yeah, I think it may actually come in a little better than that, actually, by the time we get to June 30. That's why the move to 8.5 is a little more generous here.
Got it.
Because it's based on either projected mid-year that you've already seen, or if I've had an updated since then, I would
Okay.
use that better information to then project a 3.5% growth.
I see, and I understand at our last council meeting, we approved the ceasefire manager, and it'll be coming out of this funding, correct?
Yeah, but one of the things we want to do this year is we want to create a Measure Z budget so people can see exactly where the money's coming. It won't be a separate fund, but we will account for it so that the public can see where exactly the money is coming from. So the ceasefire money that we've got in the budget so far, which is only about $175,000 right now. Is that right? Well, no, plus the new position.
Yeah.
Plus the new position. That will be accounted for under that Measure Z funding.
Okay, so it'll be labeled, it'll be identified separately?
Yes,
For transparency purposes?
yes.
Thank you.
Continue.
Okay. I was going to turn the next revenue page. There you go. I was going to talk through a little more of the detail on revenues. You'll notice they're up approximately $7 million from the prior year, about $4 million from the projected number I shared with you at mid-year. Overall, about 3.4% as a whole, which is just coincidental that it's the same as the sales tax number. That's just a coincidence. But that's the overall revenue growth projected for next year. When we do the projections, we use consultants to aid in the key projections. For instance, sales tax and VLF, an outfit called Hinderleiter Delamas is a consultant we use that helps us identify and get into the granular detail with the sales tax numbers. And then utility users tax is one. Another one, we have Muni Services we have a contract with, and we use them, and they assist with that too. And you're talking about a major portion of the revenue there, so it's nice to have that third party. At the end of the day, ultimately, we are making that call. We're not taking their number, but we're using them as an input source, seeing what's actually happening this year. And then when all is said and done, the last line there is we aim for accuracy with a lean to conservatism, because we need to not to get too aggressive. That'd be way bad to put numbers in the budget that we don't think we're really going to get to. I'd rather be able to look you in the eye and say, I have high confidence these numbers are going to materialize, and we may even do a little better kind of thing. But overriding, we want to get we want accuracy, not just conservatism. So, okay. On this On the specific revenue, the key assumptions on some of the more major revenues, sales tax and Measure Z, I used a 3.4% over mid-year, or as Councilman Marquez pointed out, on the Measure Z, it was a little updated number because I had some better news than mid-year showed. So that said, but either way, 3.4% was the growth percentage we used for the sales tax-oriented revenues. And then for the vehicle license fee in lieu, the city manager was talking about, the county gives us a number for next year, and that was approximately 4% greater than the current year's. And so we start with that number. The current fire annexation formula splits the revenue 65-35, so we then did that. But as he was explaining with the $2 million of good news that he promised you I would bore you in painful detail with, we're tracking the actual activity for some of the items that push money into the county fire district, and we've had some positive news associated primarily with the RDA refinancing you all approved over a year ago, but some time back. And as a result, we have more money flowing into the property tax coffers, if you will, as a result of that. And because the contract with the county for the fire annexation specifically allows us to reset that 65-35 split for that type of an item, I've met with the county once already, and there's no negotiation, just the contract says to do that. And so there's roughly $2 million of good news in that mathematical formula that will flow into next year that we've accounted for here.
Councilman Nickel.
You're going into utility user tax next? Okay. Just real quick, I did have a question on that particular tax.
Sure.
I know that in the past, the city was concerned about being shorted on some of those funds, and in fact, one time we were paid $300,000 plus because it was determined that in fact they were not paying us the amount that was in fact due. What is the process of auditing that to ensure the utilities are in fact sufficiently ensuring that we're getting our fair share of those revenues?
Yeah. Couple answers. One's a general answer, one's more specific. We have the right to do audits and so forth, but that involves resources and time that at this point in time hasn't materialized, so that's the specific answer. I don't really have a good answer for it. But on the general side of the fence, Muni Services is the company statewide that does this work. And so if Edison's having a problem or Verizon's having a problem, they're not having it in San Bernardino, they're having it corporately. And so there is a lot of attention. We have monthly calls that we participate in, and these kinds of things are monitored. So there's conversation going on relative to Edison right now because Edison's payments are down from prior years. There could be good reasons for that, but it's a little unusual because their rates typically go up each year. And so as a result, that's being looked into to see is there something remiss there. So it's not a San Bernardino issue, but we get to kind of coattail that by virtue of being involved with them and the contract.
Okay, and then also on the, I believe on the vehicle license fee, there were some issues with zip codes that we were dealing with, if I recall, a year ago.
That's DMV sales tax.
DMV sales tax.
You know that issue?
Yeah, we had some zip code discrepancies where there were addresses that were actually in the
okay, I think I
city,
understand.
but they were not being credited to the city. And did we ever determine what amount was owed, or was there an amount owed on that?
If there's one specific you're asking about, I don't know the answer. But HDL does probably 20 or more a year when they find these kinds of situations where sales tax is not being allocated properly to our jurisdiction for any number of reasons. They go in and do an audit themselves of the situation, and they file with the Board of Equalization, and I get the notices, and I haven't seen one where they were not awarded in our favor because they do their homework.
Okay, because if I recall, I think there was an actual finding of fact that there were zip codes that were in fact in the city, and we were not getting the revenue, and I've never heard back as to whether or not we were ever made whole on any of that.
I don't think, and Councilmember Mulvihill brought that up a year ago too. And do you remember the specific?
There was a lawsuit that we were following, and I'm not quite sure what the continuation on that is, but I can look up, I've got the records on that, but again, there was a lawsuit that had been filed, and I'm not quite sure what county, it was some county up in Northern California. And
as I recall, there's a number of questions about how the Board of Equalization allocates car sale money. In fact, there was one determination this year that worked against us, if you'll recall. All over the state, cities and counties, there was an adjudication, and there were winners and there were losers, and we were actually a loser on that one. It wasn't a substantial amount of money, but it came out against us. And I recall that when this came up originally, in fact, Bill Manis was working on it before he left. And I remember that we talked to HDL about it, and we asked them to stay on top of it. I can't say that I recall what's happened since. We'll go back and ask
I can certainly ask them.
Keep in mind, the State Board of Equalization is in disarray of sorts right now. And this was a big item that was had statewide implications. I don't think anything's been resolved because I've not seen anything that came across the desk that talked about it. But we'll go back and ask again to see if there's anything additional.
There were a couple of issues. One was the Medline issue. I don't know if that's the one you're referring to. And then there was also the Amazon. And we had part. Are you talking sales tax? Are you talking? But I don't remember a specific case related to. Thank you.
I don't either. That's fine.
Yeah, I recall the sales tax pieces, but I don't recall the.
It is sales tax.
We're
talking about sales tax.
So I don't think it was vehicle related to the issue he's talking about with zip codes. Is that what you're referring to?
And it was a vehicle the zip code of the buyers of the cars, but I don't think it's been resolved. But I do recall that. And then, of course, separate from that, there's the whole Amazon issue, which is not going to be resolved in our favor at all. So I think Gary's got something.
No, I just want to say that I don't know what's happened with that case on the zip codes and auto tax or auto sales tax, but I can look that up and I'll have that information for you at the next meeting.
Thank you. Councilman Shred. Will you finish, Councilman? Councilman Shred.
One concern is that out in the Fourth Ward, the east and north end it's actually people think they live in Highland, and I think the zip codes show up as a Highland address. So if someone up there is buying a car and turns in their Highland address or Highland zip code, that sales tax may be going to the city of Highland. I think that's some of the issue that we've been talking about, or that's been a concern. So we just want to make sure that, because that was Highland at one point in time, and it got annexed in, and they never changed it. People still receive mail, I believe, that says Highland, even though they live in the city of San Bernardino. So that's something we should be looking into and verifying and be sure of.
If I could sort of muddy the waters a little bit more, I had Ruth Parrish in IT do a GIS survey, and she found that besides the Highland, there was plenty in the southwestern corner of San Bernardino that were listed under Colton and Real. In fact, there's about, I think there was 2,500 or 3,000 addresses that are listed under Colton, and so Colton. If you think about how often do you buy a car, and so you've got 3,000 addresses, how many cars those people are buying every year, and how many sales taxes are being lost by the city, I think it's pretty significant.
Could be. Need to look into it.
Thank you.
We'll look. I think that the preliminary response we got was that it's not a zip code issue to begin with. Unless even if it's an internet purchase, then it would be a pool item. It wouldn't be a zip code item. And I think that was a preliminary response. But it's a much bigger case than just us. And we'll find out.
The next is utility users tax. That's got really no growth projected. It's actually down projected slightly next year. And we were talking a moment ago about that industry-wide, that's an issue. That cell phones, for instance, people abandon landlines and rate wars and those kinds of things. It erodes the revenue base at which we collect utility users tax, and so that's not a growing item. It's actually gone backwards by about $100,000. So. Then lastly, in the revenues of the world, I wanted to point out that we have a fees and charges study we're wrapping up this month or the first of next month. We will be bringing to you the results of to chat about. It's not sure exactly what the recommendations will be at this point in time, but it's been a long time, I think, since we've had an update, so it would not surprise me if the recommendation is increased fees or rates and charges. But that's ultimately a decision for the council to decide how they want to go with that. But we'll provide you the information to have a robust conversation about that.
Councilman Nichol.
Are those existing fees and charges, or does it also include proposed fees and charges?
It's largely the existing. I believe there may be some proposed. As the consultant talked with the departments, they would have had an opportunity to discuss if there was any new fees that they thought were appropriate for whatever reason, based on their situation. So.
Okay, because I know there's been discussion, and I'm not sure what the status is, but on the street sweeping, on parking restrictions, my understanding is that's general fund revenue, those fees that are collected, and whether or not we should begin discussing or entertaining that. I know most other cities have parking restrictions on street sweeping days. We don't, for whatever reason.
I think that's a good example of a council policy issue that we need to put on the list to talk about. Probably most cities don't, but a lot of cities do. 3 of mine have done that. The challenge we've got is that we'd have to start from scratch on the program. And that means putting up thousands of signs, doing all the public education. I will tell you that it does generate quite a bit of revenue that comes out of the pockets of your residents, and as a result, it's a pretty unpopular way to collect money. But Culver City, for instance, collected a huge amount of money. I worry about our population being able to pay that kind of fine, because you have to charge a pretty high fine in order to cover the administrative costs. And if you charge $10, I've thought, well, if we did that here, first of all, if you're going to do street sweeping with street sweeping hours, it needs to be for the reason that you want to clean your streets. I mean, that needs to be the reason you do it, not to collect money, but to clean your streets. If you decide from a policy standpoint that that's a priority, then we can implement that program. I've thought, well, maybe you could do a $10 fine because it would be something people here could afford, but that won't pay your overhead, so that doesn't accomplish the purpose. It might help you keep your streets clean, but it's not going to accomplish any kind of revenue. The adjudication is difficult. Keep in mind, we just liened 2,000 properties because people didn't pay their trash bill. Getting people to pay street sweeping fines, especially if they have multiple fines, gets to be very difficult to collect. So it's something that bears a full analysis, and I think we should do it starting with the issue of what do we need to do to get the streets clean, and then look at what the costs of implementation are. But to me, that's a real solid policy issue that we can put on the list.
Thank you.
Okay, that was the end of revenues. If we look for any other questions on revenues before we turn the page to the expenditure side of the equation. The first page is just it's a breakdown of costs by department, shows the different categories. It's designed to be information for you, but it's not a talking point this evening necessarily. And then when you turn the page, same kind of thing. It's the proposed budget this year as compared to last year to give you some sense of where things are going. But then, unless there's any general questions, we would jump into the first departmental conversation, which is the mayor's office and the mayor's programs. I'm looking for any questions. I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to go ahead and keep moving then. The first department tonight is the mayor's department. Has an administration program. His FTE count is moving from 5 to 4 as they're deleting one assistant to the mayor, one level person. Then we're classifying 2 positions from an assistant to the mayor 1 to an assistant to the mayor 2, and an executive assistant to the mayor to assistant to mayor 3. And so the net result is 1 less body. And with that, there was no other points of particular interest in the mayor's department that are differences from the prior year, if you will, that are worth highlighting.
I guess I have a question.
Councilman Mulvihill?
There's going to be a reduction of 1 position in the mayor's office, and I see that the salaries are actually going up. In other words, I'm looking at salaries for 16-17, actual is $261,000, and then proposed is $352,000.
Okay.
Am I right? And I guess what I'm asking is that if the staff is going down, the salaries are going up. Is that right? Looks like almost $90,000.
Yeah.
Am I right on that?
The actual is 16-17 to date, and so that's
To date.
What is it as of what is the date as of? So as of probably sometime in April. So it's maybe not that helpful a call. I'm looking at the prior year budget of 358 to compare to 352.
I see.
So it's really going down a bit.
Gotcha.
But basically, that position is
Gotcha.
not being used in funding the increases for the other 2
Okay.
positions. Questions? We'll go to City Council. And the programs there are administration, council support, and City Council. No changes in FTEs, and the general fund budget of $886,000. Okay. We'll keep on moving to City Clerk. Oh, I'm sorry, City Manager Office. My notebook's in different order, sorry about that. So go to City Manager's Office.
Councilman Valdivia?
Thank you, Mayor. Mark, I just want to, I think we need to talk about salaries for city council members, the mayor. What is the plan for us to begin implementing what the new charter calls for?
We'll be discussing that as one of our, I'm looking at it, Andrew, one of the upcoming workshops on charter implementation will deal with that subject, right?
Right. Our goal was, remember, the last charter update was to bring a study session forward in about June to talk about commissions, compensation, and also some of the civil service. Now, some of the preliminary civil service changes will be presented at the upcoming meeting, but there are other things that are broader related to personnel rules. We plan to bring that back to a study session, and again, we'll be looking for a date in June to address those 3 specific items.
So civil service only because it's reflected in the transition here already, correct?
It's reflected in the transition here, but there also we need to start making those changes to a personnel commission. So there's some immediate things that the charter is very clear on that we'll be presenting at the upcoming meeting, but we do need to have an in-depth conversation about some of the rules and procedures and things like that related to our personnel. And again, we plan on doing that at a study session in June. We'll deal with those 3 specific issues: commissions, compensation for council, and then some of the remaining personnel rules that need to be addressed.
Yeah, I think the civil service part is really a matter of just bringing all the different ordinances and regulations into consistency with the charter.
Yes.
The council compensation is obviously a more complicated issue because the charter, as I recall, calls for establishing
A committee.
a committee.
Yeah.
And then the committee will make recommendations
To the
the council. The council then has to make a decision.
And then it would be effective at
if
the
in
next-
fact the council decided to change it, and this council, I'll give you cover here, this council needs to provide some compensation for council members, whether it's current or future. The idea that you're working for what you work for is absurd. So I would assume that this committee will come back with recommendations that will add some compensation. That then goes into effect, if it's adopted, that would go into effect at the time of the next seating of a city council after the next election. So it wouldn't be in this year's budget.
But we'd also discuss council and mayors because
Yes.
the charter calls for both.
I
Yes.
think that's right.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
All elected.
And foreseeably, you think before December of this year, we'll have that commission formed and set up and ready to go?
Yes, our goal would be to bring some suggestions to you in June, get direction on how you
All
want
right.
to see that commission formed, and then immediately start forming that group and working on that.
Ultimately, the whatever recommendations come from the Citizens Advisory Committee, we have final authority
Yes.
on marking it up and reconciling our differences and implementing a new salary policy. Is that right?
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
accurate.
Councilman Shred.
Along those lines, though, that can't take place until after the next election, correct?
It would be effective.
Effective after the next election. So it will not affect any current sitting members of the council,
Unless reelected.
unless reelected. Exactly. Well,
It would affect a current sitting council member whose election time
Is on a different cycle.
is on a different cycle.
Yeah.
It's just that the whole council will become effective on the same date following the next election.
okay. All right, fine. That's clarification there. But the other question I had was on the mayor's office. We've gone down in employees, but up in total expenditures by reclassifying. And I would be looking with the new charter and with really kind of less responsibility of the mayor, that if anything, that number should be staying at the same or going down rather than going up. I don't know if this is the appropriate place to be talking about changes, but that to me is something that needs to be at least considered, in that though the mayor still, according to the charter, will be a full-time employee, full-time person, and still has outside responsibilities to other agencies and JPAs and what have you, it may require less support staff in that office than what has been, and he is going down in the number, but the amount, the dollars amount's going up. So I'm looking for things to go down rather than up.
I understand. I'm not sure I've blown this mic out, but Dixon, is that correct? In the mayor's budget, the offset to the two reclassifications is fully uses up the salary for the fifth position?
Yes, so part of the adjustment we made is the mayor's salary when we did the budget last year, the adjustment was not included. So it's fully reflected in this budget, as well as some of the adjustments we've made to some of the other employees.
Talk into...
Part of the reason why the salary is up is because the mayor's adjustment that happened this year was not reflected in the last year's adopted budget. It's reflected this year.
There was an increase in the mayor's salary?
Yes.
Superior Court judges. Okay, and it's tied to the Superior Court judges? That's how that's established, I believe.
Correct. So that adjustment is reflected in this year's budget.
Okay, so the mayor's job, no offense, sir.
It actually went down, though,
Okay.
because you're not looking at the detail level.
Oh, okay.
It went from 358 to 352.
Okay.
So actual sales, or salaries did drop. It was benefits that took a big jump,
Oh, okay.
okay?
All right.
As well as the charges that are being charged for the M&O and contractual, so.
Okay, well, I'm just saying.
Salaries actually went down.
Yeah, that's fine, and I understand that, and I'm certainly not going to penny pinch at this point in time, but with the charter change and a little different responsibility of the mayor, I'm just wondering if the office needs to be looked at a little differently in terms of support to the mayor. So that's all. That's my only comment.
Yeah, just my personal opinion on this. The mayor's office wasn't big to begin with, and so all you've got in there is just the 4 positions. And the mayor is still needing prep for all those commissions and committees and council meetings.
State of the city addresses.
They have all of the special events that they're involved in, and proclamations and meetings galore. I think this is a pretty lean mayor's budget.
Yeah, I think when you look at the prior years, you had a significant number of additional staff that were in that office. No, but prior to the reduction, you had a significantly higher
There was a
staffing.
significant deduction
Right,
by our
it's-
former mayor and his staff. Significant. That's okay. We can move on.
Okay. Next department is City Manager's Department, or City Manager's Office. The programs remain primarily the same. You'll notice ceasefires been added, as well as administrative services, which is the relabel of the civil service. FTEs are moving up, as indicated. Here's the detail for that, from 18 to 25. There's an added call taker, a community intervention program manager. That's the ceasefire position. Accountant 3, which is outside the general fund. That's funded by CDBG monies. Real estate division manager. And then there's those 4 plus the 3 transferred from civil service.
Do we not still have a double count in here for the position that Cruz was in?
We have that. The real estate division manager would be Cruz's position.
Right.
But where I think that there's potentially a double count, and I'm sorry, Brent, because I didn't notice this before. I think when Councilmember Valdivia asked the question on page 4, I do think that the city manager's office reflects the increase, but there's also the line item there for civil service, so there is a double count there of the 3 positions on slide 4. See what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Manager went up,
Yeah.
but you still have civil service here. Oh, I'm sorry, it says 0. Yeah.
No, yeah, I think the double count is in the, if you look on the page under the city manager tab at full-time positions, we show an economic development division manager being included both years, and that position goes away in the second year.
Yes.
So I think it goes from 18 to 24, not 18 to 25. And those dollars are in the budget, so that's $100,000 that we've got extra here.
Yes.
So, Mark, through the chair.
Excuse me, Councilman Nickel?
I'm okay.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, sir. So the 3 coming over from civil service, that gives me 21. So what are the 3 other positions then? Because I'm not following you. That you suggest there's 24.
No, I just explained it's 24, not 25. Help me.
Call taker
Call
is 1.
taker.
Call taker
Call
and the
taker.
cease manager. Ceasefire manager.
And an accountant 3.
Accountant 3.
That's funded by
In
HUD
housing.
monies.
I'm sorry?
It's a housing position where we have had a consultant that will now, that service will be done by a full-time accounting position.
Well, why isn't that in the finance department?
Because it's a housing accounting position. It's,
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
remember Annie was at the last meeting and I introduced her as Daisy? I'm sorry if you're here, Annie.
She's not.
She's watching you.
I'm still apologizing for it too. But
So it's to support her efforts.
It's really to replace her efforts.
To remove the contractual and
great,
replace it with
right.
a permanent position.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I have another question. I'm going to give a kind of a brief kind of concern regarding the call taker. I really think that our call center needs a operations manager. I don't know what we need to do with the call center, but I really would like to reevaluate or have your department reevaluate the efficiencies. And I'm getting a lot of concerns from residents, calls suggesting that calls aren't being returned, the CRM tickets are not being closed out properly. And so I'd like to just completely air out, I'm completely not happy with our call center.
We can. I'll tell you, though, the problem isn't in the call center. The problem is in Public Works. And I think we're going to get that resolved. And we have to get it resolved because it's a big problem. Your identification of the problem is perfect. It's a problem. And but I think we've put our finger on it, and I think we know how to fix it. We do need the fourth position, independent of what you're saying. We need that position because it's also going to be an information desk after we move. It's not going to be down in the basement.
All right. It's going to be at the Veneer Tower, and then she's going to, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. With additional responsibilities on the call center in case that she needs to or he needs to somehow relieve that person down in the call center.
Yes.
Is that right?
And
So they will be actually there at that office, not only handling calls for service from the members of the community, but also handling walk-in requests, helping
Okay,
direct
fair
members of
enough.
the public to the various facilities that we're going to be at. And then just to echo what the city manager said, as your interim director of Public Works, I can tell you that the problem is in some of our operating departments, in particular Public Works. So we're working through those now. Martin's done a great job with others in the Public Works Department to identify the calls that have not been being responded to and the fact that there are CRM tickets that are being closed without proper resolution. So I think that will be
Who is
resolved.
Martin? Is Martin here?
Costucci, he is here today.
Hello,
He's
Martin.
assisting us.
First time I've ever seen you, sir. Welcome.
Yeah, he's assisting us on an interim basis because obviously there's a lot of work in Public Works, but he's identified that there are issues with that CRM system and things being closed out without proper attendance.
Well, again, I renew my passionate plea that call center operations needs to be reevaluated. The promise 5 to 6 years ago to residents was that we were going to eliminate costs, we were going to come down and somehow have an answering service and a concierge white glove service committed to residents, and that's not what I'm getting from people. The average resident in my city is saying, I don't get the callbacks, I don't get the concierge service and the level of commitment from the call center. So I don't know who's responsible, but
well, I'll tell you, I believe in being candid about this stuff. The city made a promise it couldn't keep.
Right.
And we have to be truthful about that, and we have to resolve our issues. There is no way in the world we're going to resolve every complaint that comes in. The more that we get the public involved in sending in complaints, the further we're going to fail to keep the promise. And to make that call center be efficient at a 3-day turnaround, we would need an army of people. There are too many issues in this town to be able to do that kind of responsiveness on that kind of basis. So we're going to have to, I think the question is right on target. We need to evaluate the whole program,
Right.
from policy to staffing to priorities, because it's not going to work the way we're doing it. What we were doing in Public Works is when it looked like it was going to rain, we'd take staff off and have them do storm drain work. And then the rain would come, we'd have potholes, we'd take staff off and have them do pothole work. And then people would call and say, no one's getting the graffiti clean. That's because they're all filling potholes. We don't have anywhere near enough people to do the work that needs to be done to deal with every complaint that comes in. We got to be honest with ourselves about that, and we got to budget accordingly. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to do a full evaluation of that.
Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Mark, I have a question regarding the economic development position. I know in other cities it's an entire division. And do you envision down the road, not tonight, not next year, but maybe in a few years from now, have an economic development division for a city the size, 210,000? I think we need to kind of look forward toward that, because that's one of the complaints that I get from the business community, that they're frustrated. They don't know who to go to. They can't get a hold of the 6th floor or the call center, and so they just end up going somewhere else. And I think that's a shame.
Well, I think the first thing we got to look at is that we're a city of 210,000 with 3 planners.
Wow.
I mean, that's
How many should we have?
a dozen. I mean, it's...
We're not even close to that.
No, we're not even close. There's 2 more up here on the board tonight, but so...
Associate planners.
So
yeah.
first of all, we're a long way from being a city that's equipped to do like other cities do. We're going to have to be as good as we can be with what we've got, and with whatever creativity we can come to play. Yes, economic development is important. I think, I mean, this is our recommendation, and I think I speak for Andrea as well. What we really need in that function is somebody who really understands the real estate of this community. Somebody who knows where all the developable land is, knows it off the top of their head, knows who owns it, knows who's interested in doing a deal, who's not interested in doing a deal, knowing where there's infrastructure to support different kinds of development, knowing who's interested in doing development in town, and matchmaking, putting people together. We're not going to create markets. No city really creates markets. We have to make sure we're not an obstacle to people who want to do business. That's what you're talking about.
Right.
And we need to be sure that we're able to be knowledgeable enough about what's there that we can help people do the investments and the deals they need to do. So what we're looking for is a new department, essentially, that would be a department that is a real estate, asset management kind of department, economic development. Consolidate the economic development function that we've had, Cruz and Nancy, you know, just 2 people.
Successor agency.
Have the successor agency fall under that, because that's property too. That's property management too. We've got all of that property. Combining those 2 functions, both internal and external asset management, we think we can serve the public a lot better. But that equation also means that we have to support Mark Persico's operation, where he's been so underfunded for so long, to make sure that when that liaison between planning and economic development occurs, that we've got the people there to be able to deal with it.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly, because one of the complaints that I hear from business owners or potential business owners is the lack of follow-up. There is no follow-up, and they get frustrated. They're like, you know, I want to invest in here, but I just don't feel supported, and then they go somewhere else.
You know, one of the things that happens in a city like ours is that a lot of the people who come in wanting to do business, not all, but a lot of the people who come in wanting to do business are not heavily experienced. And that means that you need to be able to help them a little bit more than you do in a situation. You know, when you're working in Culver City or Burbank, most of the people that come in to do business with you have done it before. They've done it in your city before. And it doesn't take as much time and effort as it does in a city with because a lot of, at the front end, as you're starting to come back, a lot of the people approaching us are not people with long, deep development experience. Some are, but most of them are not. And so it takes a whole lot more effort to put those deals together. And we got to develop a reputation. It's what you said, and it's what John was just saying. Every time somebody says, gee, we went in and met and there's no follow-up, you know, that's check, that's strike.
Let's move on.
And so we're going to have to build that reputation, and that's putting people in place who are superior talents to where they can deal with all of those issues, all of the above, with a small staff. So we got to find talent.
And you're absolutely right. Is this specific position already advertised? Is
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, thank you.
But we're hoping to soon, once the budget's adopted.
Yeah, we're in the process of creating the job specification, which would come to the council for approval.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I really do appreciate the comments by Councilmember Marquez, because I too get those same comments of concern where Councilman Valdivia, my emails aren't returned, my call's never been answered. I visit City Hall and I get a bunch of red tape and bureaucracy. We have to do better. You know, there's other competing cities regionally that are looking just to eat us alive. And it's unacceptable for City Hall to be, this should be a resource center, folks. This place should be a resource center where we can get in and out in 90 days and get people approved and get them out the door in a toolkit and say, God bless you, good luck on your business. But for us to kind of, we've been talking about economic development for 2.5 years. And it's no fault of yours, Mark. I'm not trying to, I'm giving a little bit of historical rant here. That for 2.5 to 3 years, we have, as a council, I remember clearly that I didn't know if quite the position was necessary. And now all of a sudden, Mr. Sparza has left us. So I say fund it. And I have a different vantage point regarding the real estate asset management. I think that's critical. I understand the successor agency has, you know, we have 300 properties to manage and whatnot. But my position would be, can community development, along with an economic development manager, somehow cross-coordinate and cross-pollinate so that we can get the plan check department a cohesive agreement between those two departments so we can get these businesses out the door quicker. We need to do that. Other cities are doing it. Why can't we replicate it? And let's stop talking about it. Let's just do it.
Yeah, I agree. I won't tell you that I see very many people that tell me they're stuck in plan check. What I see is people who can't get to yes based on the peculiarities of what it is they're trying to process, and they're not textbook situations. So we're going to have to be able to work with people when they bring us something in that's not textbook.
I say let's babysit these people
who
are not completely aware of how to get business done in this city.
Right.
Babysit them. We need to coddle every business opportunity possible.
I agree with that.
Councilman Nichol.
Yeah, and that's also a concern I've had expressed to me is I'll be honest, I'm befuddled sometimes in terms of who's the appropriate person to handle a particular matter when it comes to new development and business attraction. It seems to me we got some people in community development that are involved. We have some people in your office that are involved. And I'll be honest, I don't even know the flow chart. I don't know how it works.
It's send it to the city manager. That's the council manager form of government. If you're a council member and somebody wants help on a development project or a development interest, send it to the city manager. That's my job, is to make sure, or to the assistant city manager. That's our job. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be the directors that's, you know, we're the symphony conductors.
And I get that. I understand the city manager form of government. But like I say, so for instance, I'm looking here, housing division manager, right, which is going...
What page you on?
I'm on, there's no page number here.
No, it's the city manager.
So it's under city manager, first page, second side. So I'm looking here at the housing division manager position. What is that position and what is that role? I assume they don't do any of the community development block grant.
It's what they do.
They do or they don't?
That's Brandon's old job. It used to be called Deputy Director of Housing, and now we're calling it Housing Division Manager.
Do they oversee the community development block grant program as well? Okay, so then we have coordinators and assistants for, so in terms of the organization, so that person, and that Housing Division Manager reports directly to you, correct?
Right.
Okay, and then we have the Real Estate Division Manager, who doesn't work in housing, right? They don't do anything in housing, but they are the real estate. I think that's sort of the ambiguity that I'm trying to get my head wrapped around. To me, housing has to do with real estate, but we have a different
We
real
haven't
estate
actually titled that position. The
Okay.
Real Estate Division Manager is kind of a holding title for the budget. We'll be bringing that to you in the next couple of weeks with a title, and maybe that tells us why that's confusing. It's an asset management position. Yeah, there's, real estate is touched by multiple departments. Housing is going to deal with the housing programs. That's basically what that's going to do.
Okay. And Public Works will have facilities, but they won't deal with, so the real estate really has to do with what, the RDA properties? Is that what we're talking about?
It's the RDA successor agency properties. It's all of the city-owned properties. For instance, we own all these parking lots downtown that are just sitting there. So it's any property, the real estate component of any property we own. It won't be maintaining the air conditioning system. That'll be in Public Works, just like in any city. That's basically how it'll be.
Right, and I think my bottom line is, and I completely agree with the statement you made in your email about we've got to build the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my interest right now is understanding what that foundation is going to look like, and to ensure that foundation is responsive to the needs of the investment development community, that I think we need to be very much oriented toward serving and being able to, in a very timely and professional and informed manner, provide the services that are needed to ensure people get the information they need, the answers they need, so they can move forward.
I agree, but we also have to say we have to fund it accordingly, right?
Sure.
When we want to compare ourselves to other cities, let's compare ourselves.
And all I'll do is I'll compare to, we were told several years ago when we hired Bill Manis and Cruz that, they were going to do the work that needed to be done, that, everything was going to work great, and come to find out they're both gone now, and we're still having that conversation about how do we have a good customer service oriented operation in terms of attracting business and development to the city. So I just want to make sure that we don't have this conversation again in another year or two about what else we need to do to make it work.
As you've said, and as everybody has very kindly said, I can't really talk about the conversations of the past. Pretty much that team's all gone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you that I think that this helps form the foundation that we need. I'm also telling you that we're not funding everything as much as we need to have funded. We don't have the money to fund everything that we need to have funded. I don't have enough money to put 12 people in planning. I don't have funding. There's 2 code enforcement positions on here below the line, because I put planners above the line. You could argue that the code enforcement role is more critical on a day-to-day because you get more phone calls about that. But I'm telling you, if we don't put some planners up there, we're never going to get ourselves to the position that we can do the things you're asking us to do. I think if we hire the right talent and put in place the right systems, we've got as good a chance as any to provide the service level that the council wants us to provide.
And I think my other concern is just to make sure we don't have people stepping on each other's toes. That we have very clear delineated lines of responsibility so things can flow. And certainly if the answer is, look, we just don't have the resources right now to provide that particular service you're asking for, that to me is sufficient. But we need to get them those answers, and I'm finding that it takes so much time compared to our surrounding competing cities that we're losing some business here.
Yeah, we need to, and this is council. This will be what the council needs to work on over the next year and two years. We need to get to where land use policy in this city is clear so that when someone comes to the counter and says, I want to do this kind of project in this location, the staff can actually look it up and say, this is what you can do, and this is what our council has said it will support. A lot of what we get here is out-of-the-box kind of stuff. And when they get to the counter, a lot of times the answer is, I just don't know. You know, somebody comes in, and how much of what we get is somebody wanting to get one of those parcels from the RDA days. I had 2 today where people came in and expressed interest in properties that were RDA properties. And I can tell people what the council policy is, that we're going to go out and we're going to do competitive process and we're going to hire a realtor to move forward. Sometimes those people will walk out of here saying, I want to buy that property and I want to do my gas station or I want to do my Quickie Mart, and nobody at City Hall will give me a straight answer. Well, I'll give them a straight answer that we're going to have a process that's going to be competitive and it's going to end up in front of the council, and they think that they just got to shuffle because that's the answer they got. So we need to get to where we have as clear a set of policies on what we're going to do with land and land use that when people come to the counter, we can give them an answer they can count on, because nothing is more discouraging to somebody doing investment than not being able to get an answer when they come in. And I know that. I've been a planning director much of my life. I know that. And we're trying to work toward the day when we have that. And we're going to need some help from you. We're going to put it in front of you to help us clarify what is and isn't okay here. Mark's got this code update project that they've been working on. We need to get that done. And we need to get that in front of the council, and we need to get clarifications. There's a lot of work to do in order to be able to satisfy that desire, but we're working on it. This budget brings us part way.
Back to Brent.
Okay. The remarks we already talked about. Ceasefire. Page 12 of the presentation. The ceasefire program is new. The city manager budget this year, as well as the civil service being transferred from into his office and being renamed admin services. So, any other questions on the city manager? Great. Okay, we'll move on to city attorney. Pardon me? I don't know. We'll see. Not any changes being proposed in the city attorney's office. They have the same number of staff, and really no comments to highlight there.
Okay, Councilman Nixon.
Yeah, a couple questions. Are we going, or when do you anticipate, and this is directed to the city attorney, in terms of, obviously we have a new charter. Eventually we will need to transition to a new structure and mechanism regarding the city attorney's office, and whether it's contracted out or whether it's an appointed position. Regardless, we're going to need to start gearing up and understanding what that transition is going to look like, and make sure that we have some overlap between what will eventually be the structure of the city attorney's office and how that person will be selected or hired. What do you anticipate in terms of that transition plan, and what expenditures would you anticipate being related to that process as we're moving forward with that transition?
I don't envision something much different from what we have right now, apart from some new efficiencies, if you will, that Andrea and I have already talked about. Bring in a new look, if you will, of the overview of how the office functions and what we're doing, and perhaps establish some new efficiencies. Whether the council is going to go to contracting out the entire office or something along those lines, or what council wants to do as a policy is something that you're going to have to set. But But from this city attorney's perspective, and I'm here until my term expires at the very least, there's not going to be a significant overhaul, if you will, or a complete change of how the office functions.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure the day that your term expires, then we aren't standing around trying to figure out how or what the process is going to be to transition. I think we'll need to start having those discussions and understanding that there'll be costs associated with that. And to me, a budget document is certainly about numbers, but it's also about planning, and it's about understanding the road ahead and how you anticipate addressing those.
I don't believe the charter itself calls for significant for anything other than what's presently at the city attorney's office. So with respect to what council wants to do ultimately with the office, that will be up to council. And of course, that discussion can be.
Yeah, and my hope would be that we'd be able to work, in tandem with you while you're here. Obviously, you've had, plenty of time in that office. I think you understand the needs, and I think it's a very candid, frank, and necessary discussion that we're going to need to start having.
Sure, and I think that should be a continuing process. As with all departments, you look for new efficiencies or new ways of doing business as the need requires or as circumstances require, and as you move forward, being responsive to the needs as they evolve, the needs of the city, and ways that you can establish new efficiencies and so on.
And then I did have a question about the current status and process and revenues and expenditures and so forth related to our receivership program and what you anticipate going into this next budget year. From what I've seen, we've demonstrated some success with that program. From what I understand, the revenues generated essentially cover the costs associated. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is some cost recovery related to that program that I would like to see us potentially really start stepping up that program. And I didn't see anything in the budget this year that indicates that we're going to start ramping that up. What are your thoughts on the relative success or necessity, or what is what do you see as the future of the receivership program?
At one time, we had discussed the possibility of allocating some HUD monies to the program in the tune of $400,000. When we look at a property, we have to measure the accessibility or the whether or not we can recover the costs through the process of rehabilitation and then a resale and cover all the costs involved in that process. Sometimes when we get close to a point where we're not going to be able to cover costs, there's a margin there that will cause the property not to be used in the receivership program. So those $400,000 were going to be for purposes of adding a number of properties to maybe $10,000, $15,000 per additional property when we ran into that situation. Perhaps an allocation of it now. After that discussion, it has been determined, I believe, that HUD funds are not available, or so I've been told. HUD funds are not available for that purpose. I'm not sure whether there has been a full analysis of that or not, but to date, that's the response that we have pretty much gotten. There may be funds available from another source that can serve that same purpose. Currently, which is much to our advantage, as you're aware, we recover all of our costs, including our in-house attorney's fees, the code enforcement people who are involved, and all the other costs involved. So there's virtually no cost. So an additional allocation of maybe $100,000 even would allow us to up the numbers. So I think that's a possibility that needs to be discussed if council is interested in allocating additional funding from whatever source. That would be something Mark would have to.
I agree with what Mr. Sines just said. On a program where the cost is almost entirely covered, we don't have to budget very much. because it goes to both the revenue side and the expenditure side. So to the extent that we're ready to gear up and do more, I'd say let's bring it forward and do it. I think we can cover that.
Well, and I would like to start seeing those numbers so we can start tracking year on year the number of properties, the number of units that are going through the program. I think, again, I understand that a budget is, in large respect about revenues and expenditures, but it is, to me, it's also a strategic document. Sure. And I think I want to start seeing our progress in terms of this particular program and how we're dealing with addressing blight and substandard housing and
I agree, particularly where you can recoup the additional funds that are allocated to that purpose, whether it's for additional code enforcement people, for example, or for additional lawyers, either probably contracted attorneys. And when we can recoup all of those costs, in addition to allocating some additional dollars that might go over and above what we can recoup, I think it's a big advantage to the city because it's virtually cost-free and it's a very worthwhile program. So I agree with you 100% that ought to be assessed.
Okay, that's all I have.
Mayor?
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you. Gary, I too want to encourage, we need to, short of your election cycle and the date and essentially determination of your elected position, I have a respect for that, and we've already agreed on that when your day or your term is up. However, we do need to, I concur with Councilman Nickel, that we need to at least begin conversations on the process, the wind down. What are we going to do on the city attorney's office? We've already started that for the city treasurer in large part with transitioning him to finance and keeping him on board for investment management for time being. Short time. But we do need to talk about that. We need to really grapple with the idea of, okay, now the elected city attorney is no longer, so what do we do on the next process? And it cannot wait. I'm uncomfortable with it just waiting until your term's up. I think we need to start talking about it now. It's important that we have candid, deliberative conversations on the wind down and seeing what we do as a city under the provisions of a new charter and contracting legal services out.
The charter that was replaced provided for a treasurer. The new charter does not provide for a treasurer at all. So that's a significant change and I understand how you describe that needs to be transitioned. The old charter called for a city attorney. The new charter also calls for a city attorney. However, the city attorney will not be elected. So it's really not the significant change, or doesn't have to be. It's going to be a city attorney's office that's going to have a significant in-house staff from my perspective. That's going to be council's decision, or it can be contracted out. So though that process, I think, is not going to result in something that is significantly different from the office that we have now in terms of the city attorney's function. And as time goes on, there will be certain work to do to restructure perhaps, or to re-coordinate, or to establish new efficiencies, which I've indicated I've already engaged in some conversation with the assistant city manager with respect to how we can look at the city attorney's office, maybe take a fresh look and make some changes as appropriate. But if there's going to be significant or substantial changes, of course, that will have to be a policy decision. And I don't think the new charter requires that we completely overhaul or restructure entirely the city attorney's office.
Well, agree to disagree. I think that the charter affords complete and ultimate powers to the council via resolution or ordinance markup. So while I have respect for what you're saying, sir, I think ultimately policy wise ordinance, and we can do essentially almost anything via resolution and ordinance review. And so this is really kind of maybe a policy point that we need to come under your direction, Mr. City Manager, as to what are the next steps and how do we do it. We don't have to solve it tonight. I'm just saying
I'm making a list.
I agree 100% that it's council's call as to what they're ultimately going to do. But as you know, many cities have an appointed city attorney, and the city attorney's office looks much like ours does today. The only difference is the attorney is appointed and not elected. But the structure of the office and how it functions is very similar to what we have today. And like I've indicated, they probably engage in revisiting very often the structure and make changes as appropriate as the circumstances require. But I agree, it's council's call.
I'd like us to come back to the budget, because I think that is a question that does need to be addressed, but I think in this particular setting, we're trying to get through the budget, so if we could come back to the budget.
I think maybe the answer is, we talked a moment ago about the fact that we had discussed a June study session to begin to deal with some of the personnel-related issues, compensation. We can certainly have a report prepared for you about the various options, when terms expire, and things of that nature as part of that discussion as well.
That's refreshing to hear.
You already have a work plan that you developed.
That's right.
For that issue.
Yes.
So, Councilman Melville.
There are no sacred cows here. That's good.
Well, Mr. City Attorney, when does your term of office end, your elected term of office? It's 19, isn't it?
It's 19, yes.
Yeah, so it's not as though it's
March
obviously
20, with 1 month.
There's a lot of questions that Mr. Valdivia brings up, but the point is that we've got a little bit of time that we can think about that, and we don't have to, obviously, we're not thinking about doing anything right now. And the point is that, yes, there are some decisions that have to be made. If we go to contracting, that means that ultimately the staff, present staff, or whoever is there in 19, is going to have to somehow transition to some other job someplace else. There are a lot of contract firms out there that do city attorney responsibilities. So it's not as though it's a task that we have to take on all by ourselves, because cities have done it already. And the other question that I had, I'm not quite sure if I remember what I'm picking up some of Fred's problems here in terms of memory. It's been so so long.
If you'll write it down.
One of the I have to write it down. I think the issue of going back to
You're older than I am.
the receivership program. It would seem that the housing manager office is going to become open, and it seems to me that there should be some, given that we're dealing with blighted housing, and that's one of the fundamental aspects of the HUD's criteria, that somehow, as we're looking for a new housing manager, we might also try to get more interaction between the receivership program and the new housing manager. Obviously, Ed Flores has been with HUD and knows the operation inside out, but it does seem to me that this particular program does deal with blighted housing and does deal with getting reasonably affordable housing back onto the market. It just seems there should be some way of linking the housing manager's office along with the receivership program that the city attorney's office, that there should be in the future closer.
No question. Because the choice of what properties to go after needs to be strategic.
All right, back
If
to
I
the
could
budget.
just add one thing. If you want us to do more receiverships, we need more code enforcement. Because we're doing as much as we can with what they're giving us, and they need more people to do it, basically. We can handle far more than we're doing, but we're not getting the work up to us in time to do them.
And I think if the philosophy here is that it will pay for itself, then we can dedicate code enforcement staff to that program. fact, I've told Jelena this in the past. I'll put them at a desk in her office if they're dedicated to that program, because then they won't get called out to do everything else under the sun like we do right now to our staff. But I think that's a very legitimate. I'm making a list of all of this, and I'll share the list after each of the budget workshop meetings. And I think we're getting a pretty good list of follow-up items to look at, and I'll put both of those on here.
Mayor, I forgot what I wanted to ask.
Let me ask it for you. Could we move on to the next item on the budget? City clerks?
City Clerk's office. Programs involved in her department are administration, elections, passport acceptance, and records management. Again, there's a decrease in FTEs here from 13 to 6 as the business registration staff are proposed to be transferred to the finance department. And that's the remark on this department.
Next.
Okay. Now, the pinnacle of the evening, everybody, is finance. So I prepared several comments to go through. Actually, no, I'm going to try and stop coughing still. The department is largely the same except for the two programs we're going to add, which is, again, business registration and treasurer. It moves my staff from 18 to 28. It's just, there's no new added positions. It's just the transfer of positions from those various locations into finance. And that's the extent of my shop.
Very efficient.
You're welcome. Human resources, another internal service function. Same thing as last year with administration, liability, risk management, and workers' compensation. No changes in FTE count. One slight add, it's not a material item, but it was a positive, so I wanted to comment on it, that we've allocated some funds this year for employee recognition, I think $25,000, to just do something formal to say thank you to employees. And is that the right number, Ellen? Just 25? Is that right? 20. Sorry, I embellished. $20,000. So. And she got it right. So anyway, that's the big ad in the HR department. Another internal service fund is information technology. Pretty much status quo again, except for the addition of a director, as Mark commented on, or city manager commented on earlier. And so that moves their FTE count from 14 to 15. This too is an allocated department, and so the costs get spread throughout all the general fund line departments. And one item to note is that we moved $400,000 that police pays for their computer system to their budget directly instead of trying to allocate it. It's more an efficient accounting exercise. We're moving now. Library. Not much of a change in the budget there. Same programs exist as have in previous years. No change in FTEs. But one thing we're able to do with the concept I mentioned earlier about how we've been kind of right-sizing the different departments and looking at their budgets. We've looking at dollars with Ed. We were able to identify about $25,000 that could be put into library materials purchases out of other line items, and so that was a better use, if you will, of those funds for purposes of trying to provide library service. So that was a win, we thought.
I got a question.
Councilman Mulligan.
Library services were cut back significantly about 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm just wondering, are we in a position, or have we allowed the libraries to remain open? I mean, I think that I'm not quite sure what this new budget allows. I mean, several of our branch libraries are open just a couple of days a week, and obviously the library is not just a place for books, but it's the availability of computers and internet and so forth. So it does and I'm just wondering whether this budget will allow for expanded services more than what we've had in the past, the immediate past.
Below the line, there's an item that says increase the Feldheim Library by 5 hours per week, and that would cost $70,000 for 5 extra hours a week. Not much. it's really sad that we can't use our library resources better than we do. Libraries really ought to be community gathering places. And you're right, it's so much more than just books this day and age. When you go to cities with vibrant libraries, they're doing programming, and people come in to do computer work, and there's just a thing about going to a place where you can be with your neighbors, and they're very lively places. We have our main library is located in a place that has got tremendous problems with the transient population that frequent that. If we had more people, we'd have fewer people hanging around there. They asked for additional money for security that we weren't able to put above. Last year we added a little, but we weren't able to do more. It just needs more activity. If you had more activity, we wouldn't need as much security. This may be one of those places. I don't see it in the horizon here, the money. It may be one of those places that some champions could really get behind some community fundraising. Libraries will generate that kind of community interest if people see improvement go with it. And so this may be one of those areas where we really got to throw some weight behind some kind of fundraising, because I just don't see in our budget we're going to be able to do much more with this in the near future. And it's heartbreaking.
Councilman Valdivia.
Brent, the $165,000 for other funds, can you explain that figure?
Yes, that's grant funding for the literacy program. So is that correct, Ed?
Correct.
Yeah, so that's the grant funding for literacy programs we get from the state of California, I think it is.
Right, state of California federal fund, the literacy coordinator writes grants, there's funds, $165,000. Not anything from the general fund, it's grants for literacy services.
Kidding.
And other services.
It's like Christmas.
Put it on your mind.
Sorry, everyone. Yeah, it's $165,000 for literacy funds. It's received by grants written by the literacy coordinator of state and federal funding. It's not any dollars from the general fund to perform those services. So it's value-added services at no cost to the general fund.
Is it primarily functioning at the Central Library or at all locations?
Primarily at Central Library, although there is a homework center that's part of that component. So that's 2 days a week at Villaseñor and 2 days a week at Feldheim. It's
Thank you.
splits between the two.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Marquez.
Ed, don't go too far. I need some clarification on the additional $25,000 added to library material budget. Will this be distributed amongst the current existing libraries or just one library?
I'll probably share it among all four. And in the 16-17 budget, there was only $16,000 for library books. This would take it up to 40 or 41. So I always give everyone a chance to share the pie as well. We were fortunate in the last couple of weeks that we also received a grant from San Manuel for $45,000 for librry books again.
Wow.
Thanks to
it's very generous. I didn't know about that.
Yeah. This is the second time that they've given us a grant for books, thanks to some mystery grant writer.
Anonymous.
In December 2015, we received $40,000 from them, and then just in the last couple of weeks, we received $45,000. So that certainly helps. Every bit helps, especially as the foundation has been so generous in giving us funds, but they've spent so much money since the bankruptcy year, since 2012. Right. Like they've pretty much paid for our Overdrive subscription of ebooks and audiobooks on its own without its city dollars, but even they've reached the point where they really are having to look at how much they can continue to fund, which makes it difficult. Right. We had our highest usage ever of the Overdrive resources in March, but now they're out of funds to buy new. So it's a catch-22 situation when you have the highest usage and now you're suddenly out of funds and trying to see what you can do.
Right. Well, I must say that libraries have come a long way. I know when we first filed bankruptcy in 2012, we were seriously considering closing 2 libraries, and that was devastating to us.
Sure.
And devastating to our community. So we've come a long way.
Sure.
And thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the support of the mayor and the council and the city manager and assistant city manager and the finance director, especially those of you who are veterans of the council going back to the bankruptcy declaration in 2012 and doing what you can, even with the cuts that we underwent, to try to keep library services going in this community. The board and I certainly appreciate your sensitivity to that, and we greatly appreciate the support when you have so many difficult choices and so many things to consider.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, Mayor. Mark, as part of kind of the revitalization, and Mayor, I respect that you have a deep, I think our whole council has a deep admiration to revitalize the downtown corridor. As part of that, and appended into this idea of revitalizing the downtown area, is there a possibility, I know that you sit on, I don't know, what, 8 to 10 acres of land, and why can't, this would not touch any part of the operations of the actual facility, but why not look at partnering up with a cafe or a Barnes and Noble or a coffee shop of some sort? Why can't we look and explore at other opportunities to get retail anchored on one of those corners, a cafe of some sort, to complement the operations of the library? I think we need to look at some of that usable land that sits there at a pretty decent intersection, see what we could do to maybe start floating ideas with the foundation and others to see how can we revitalize the entire downtown corridor, and what private-public partnership opportunities exist for us to develop that corner, even maybe a children's museum of some sort, so we can get a little bit more foot traffic and shoo away some of the other issues that are a common problem now with all of that parkland space that we have.
Not to explore those kinds of options. Yeah, I mean, as you know, it's hard to get the first restaurants into Theater Square. As we add them, it will be easier to add more. And so I think the day is coming when that becomes a lot more viable than it is today by virtue of the jump start that project will give us.
All right. Thank you.
Next is police. Sorry, next department is police, and they have similar operation to the prior year. FTE count is up by 2. They're proposing to add an emergency services manager and a departmental accounting technician. Both those are included above the line there. Additional, in the remarks column, we have added funding for ballistic vests to the tune of $50,000, increased overtime budget by $1 million, which is really just to move it to what's occurring every year anyway. And so that's part of that realistic adjustments. Then the security guard budget's been increased by $400,000. As was commented on earlier. And then we've allocated $1.3 million for vehicles. Of that portion, about $550,000 is general fund. The balance would be other non-general fund pieces.
Could you explain that the overtime is not new money? It's just that we've been spending that out of salary savings. Yeah. So when you see $1 million of overtime, it's not that we're expecting to have an extra $1 million of overtime. We haven't budgeted it as an overtime line. We've been paying it out of salary savings. This year, we're trying to show the salaries, and we have the salary saving credit, and we're budgeting the overtime. So it's the same $1 million that last year was in a different category.
And if we move toward filling those positions, as we're talking about police, the savings won't be there to fund that. So it's really an uptick in the staffing of police overall.
Right.
And how many budgeted sworn officers?
260. 260.
260 versus the 248 from last year.
That's budgeted. How many do we have?
Right now we have 226.
The good news is that we believe that this year correct me if I'm wrong, we believe that it's a realistic goal to fill 18 of the vacancies net, net of the people we lose. Now, why not fill them all? As I said before, it's because we can't fill that many that fast, considering the fact people are leaving at the same time. But we think it's realistic to strive to make up a net 18 over what we have today, and that's a great increase. Did I say that halfway right? Okay. 18 to 23. Right.
What are we budgeted for? 260?
The savings that you'd indicated on the board, Mark, of, I don't remember which line it was on, but you'd indicated that you're going to absorb those savings in the budget. And so that's been allocated to be able to cover some of the other new positions? Is that
some of the money that we're not able to that we'll save beyond the 2.5. Some of that money has been allocated to the bottom line on revenues in this budget to be able to afford, it's not earmarked to a specific purpose, but for instance, there's a lot of vehicles that are being funded in this budget and the Public Works budget. So we couldn't add all of that if we didn't take some of the salary savings from the police budget. And that's what we've done in this budget. So yes, I could go through that and get you the exact numbers the next time we meet if you'd like, but
some of it's capital improvements with the vehicles.
Some of it,
it's not ongoing operational costs for.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not for ongoing operational costs. That's fully funded.
Thank you. Councilman Barrios.
As far as with the vehicles, 1.3 million is going to be allocated for them. Are these replacing new vehicles or just adding to our inventory? How many vehicles are we replacing?
That would replace about 20.
With those 20 vehicles, what are we doing with those ones that we're replacing?
Yeah, but they're in public yards.
Are they in our public yard just sitting there, or are we getting somebody to come purchase them?
Until we get replacements, we have to drive to.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilman Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Mark, I need some help here from you. I'm a big fan of the Quality of Life team. Would they fall under community policing in this report?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I think, as we discussed, our Quality of Life program, the police part of it is budgeted in the police department.
Got it.
The Public Works part of it is budgeted in Public Works, and the Park and Rec part in their budget.
3 separate areas.
Yes.
And they're fully funded for 2017, 2018.
2017.
2018.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Fully funded. We assume the same operations.
Got
and
it.
that group is so creative that they've been able to fund more days a week service than we thought was possible. So
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Under the direction of Lieutenant Lawhead, their constituents are calling, thanking us for the removal of blight and encampments and illegal dumping and keeping our parks safe. So quality of life, thank you, and thank you
Yes.
for funding this.
yes, thank you.
Councilman Valdivia.
Brent or Mark, the budgeted expenditures, if I do my math, roughly it's about $76 million. So give me the breakdown, the 3.9 other funds. Is that part of the 72 or is this in addition to the 72?
It's in addition to. It's the non-general fund pieces. So that it would include things like animal control, which is accounted for separate from the general fund. The grant-based operations. I'm going to look to Dixon for a little more help, who's looking as well.
So it's 60, if I do my math, it's about 64% of the $119 million that comes in revenue.
Yeah.
64%, or about $76 million towards policing.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. What would I know that fire department is now outsourced to the county fire, you don't have to answer it now, but what, I mean, they're quote off our bucks, but can someone maybe supply me offline what that aggregate amount is that we resource out to the county fire?
The gross number is roughly $32 million, I believe.
$32 million.
But there's some trade-offs in that because part of that budget that we don't incur anymore was allocated cost too. So on a net basis, I'd want to give you a better
Can you
number.
Can you give me the numbers?
Absolutely.
So our total cost versus net cost, that'd be great. Thank you.
Anybody else? Police?
Well, I want to just say a couple editorial comments about police. We're going to move toward the day that we fully fund the bankruptcy plan. We're benefited right now by the fact we've got the COPS grant that pays what, half? 75% of the 11 officers. That'll run out a year or 2 years from now, 2019. So as the years go out, we're going to have to fund more and more of this, and the retirement costs are going up as well. And yet, the good news is we're really starting to schedule the vehicle replacements about a quarter every year, a quarter of the patrol vehicles. I'm not sure we're doing that for the other vehicles. We still have some making up to do to get to the fully funding of that plan, but we're making progress on it. There's still a lot that we're not able to do in that department that we'd like to do. We have problems, for instance, how many vacancies for dispatchers right now? Out of how many? Yeah, 10 out of 28. It's not uncommon to have vacancy problems in dispatch because it's a tough job, and it's a tough job to fill. And our dispatchers are terrific, but we don't have enough of them. We're going to have to take a look at that. We may have to, we've talked about competing on police officers, and we're not completely winning that battle, but we're not winning the battle with dispatchers either, and we're going to have to take a serious look at that. So I may be coming back to you before long to talk about that.
Councilman Nichol.
Yeah, and just to add to the mix, several years ago we bifurcated our code enforcement activities, and from what I understand, we've experienced some rather significant success in terms of having the ability of our code enforcement to have that force of police behind it, which I think is something we really need. We need to continue that. And talking about in a similar discussion as we had with the receivership program, stepping up the inspections, especially as relates to multifamily properties in the city, and looking seriously at developing a fee structure that can support those inspections, and having a system that more or less pays for itself. But I think having that system under the police department connected to the crime-free housing is something I'd like to explore in terms of stepping it up and ensuring that we have a revenue stream that can support it, that it essentially pays for itself.
We have not talked tonight about the fee study that is almost done, that'll be coming back to the council. I wish it was done 2 months ago, but the fee study that we're about to I think, finish should include, for instance, that kind of fee so that we can fully recover our costs. We're allowed to set fees up to the actual cost. So that's, I think, where we need to go on that program. If it fully recovers itself, then there's no reason we can't step up and we can't even add staff. We just got to be sure that we're really going to be able to fully recover it. It's, again, a real goal. And it's different than the code enforcement that's in community development. And I'm hoping we're going to get to where we have two good names for these programs so they don't sound like they're the same thing. But I think it was a good change, and it's a change we want to continue, and we really do want to step it up.
Thank you.
Last couple things. The police department assumed some things here that they probably didn't need to have assumed a few years ago. And I will always appreciate the fact that we've got senior management people dealing with programs that really at some point shouldn't have been under their control. Animal control is a good example. Probably shouldn't be in the police department, but thank goodness that we've had people doing it out of the police department. We need to take a look. There's another policy issue we need to look at carefully to see if there's another way to deliver animal control services. I don't think there's any other way to deal with the collection of animals. I think that's going to be something we're going to end up doing. Whether or not we want to invest money in upgrading our shelter or trying to find a different way to deal with sheltering by contract, I think we need to put on our active evaluation plate. And I'll suffer for having brought that up today, but it's something we need to look at as to whether the best solution for animal sheltering is through our city budget. Because if we're going to keep it, we've got to build a new shelter. That facility is way deficient. And we can put money into the roof, and we can put money into fixing little issues here and there, but we don't have enough to build a new shelter. So we need to look, I think, at those options. There's another budget issue we won't solve by the end of June, but we need to put it on our list of active evaluations. And now I forgot what my other section, there's another topic I wanted to bring up, but I forgot it, so I'll move on.
I have a question. On the personnel for police, emergency services manager, is that a sworn position?
No.
No, it'd be civilian.
That's my other issue.
That's the other.
Tee him up.
Right now, the emergency management function is being done by Sergeant Fivey, who does a great job. I think the world of the work he's done. He's a police sergeant, a sworn police sergeant. We probably, or not probably, I'm recommending we move that to a civilian function. It'll still be in the police department, but it'll be a civilian function. It would not only serve the purpose of having a civilian emergency manager, which is the norm, it also frees up a whole sergeant position. And that's more important in this equation. So we're recommending a civilian emergency manager largely because it will free up a sergeant position in the department.
Thank you. Councilman Valdivia.
So I'm trying to do my math. I'm trying to reconcile the vehicle replacement on the remarks section, the 1.3 million for vehicles. Then on your board here, you have 800,000 plus vehicle replacement from PD for 417.
Yeah, the 800 is not general fund.
Oh,
I put two categories on I forgot to tell you. The green is non-general fund. So the 800,000 is funded from traffic safety funds. It's funded from fines and from asset forfeiture, traffic safety, and there's a third one. AQMD, although that would be the civilian vehicles. So that's why it's two different amounts.
All right. Well, that brings up another kind of whack-a-mole issue for me, is when I look at the asset forfeiture on my spreadsheet on page, bear with me, I'm sorry. On page 5, fines and forfeitures, it's down almost $500,000. And so I'm lost here. These numbers don't reconcile for me.
Councilman, that fines and forfeitures is not asset forfeiture money. Asset forfeiture is just a separate bucket unto itself and is spent away from the general fund, essentially.
So then your $800,000, is that asset forfeiture, criminal policing, aspects, or is that what he's referring to?
It's asset forfeit. It's seizure money.
It's seizure money.
And it's not a lot of it. What the breakdown on the 800,000, Dixon, do you have it handy? I know you gave it to me.
Yeah,
Most of it's traffic
Okay.
safety.
safety.
Traffic safety grants,
No, traffic safety
fines.
The-
We get from citation fines.
Okay.
And that revenue is distinguished from fines and forfeitures. There's some nuances to what goes where, I guess, maybe be the next question. But and I don't have a good detailed answer sitting here on what that is, but certain things we receive per the state penal code go into a separate fund, that's the traffic safety fund, and then other kinds of penalties and fines and forfeitures we receive generally.
But are those restricted funds? I mean, how can a
Yes.
traffic safety fine be utilized for vehicle replacement?
It can,
For
there's a
enforcement.
vehicle code that establishes what it can be
Yeah.
used for.
And it can be used for enforcement vehicles.
Enforcement of
Traffic.
traffic control and enforcement issues. And as
Okay.
long as it's not used for personnel.
Okay, all right. So back to the number board here above the line, then if I take my animal control vehicle replacement, 150, the vehicle replacement of police cars, the other $800,000 for more police cars funded by a different source, that's what gets me to the $1.3 million.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just I didn't understand above the line. Okay,
Yeah.
cool, thank you.
Okay.
Finish with police?
Yeah, believe it or not, yes.
Okay.
Public Works?
Move on to Public Works.
Oh, that's a hard one, too.
You better do this one well.
Yeah, I know.
I'm watching you.
We have a really awkward interim Public Works Director. The programs for the Public Works Department are largely the same. We've gone through the numbers with the interim, Martin, the interim person, and Andrea, and looked in detail to try and reset and see if the allocation of funds needed to be tweaked a bit, and Martin has provided some guidance in that regard. And so there's been a shift of dollars around. You'll see also towards the bottom of the page, we've added lots of dollars actually for a number of things that are priorities. The decrease in staff, as noted, is the sewer employees going to the water department, and the fleet positions that are unfunded because they're not needed at this point in time now. But they, going the other direction there have been 4 maintenance workers added to do stormwater maintenance work. And so that goes back the other direction. Those are new. The sewer fund was doing that work before, but we don't have the opportunity at this point in time, and so that becomes a general fund function, and 4 is what we believe we need to have to make that happen adequately. So that's the shifts on employees. The actual dollars, $500,000 for vehicles, and I can't remember the nature of the vehicles in that, but it's not just cars, it's also big equipment stuff too. Yeah, utility trucks. And
Councilman Valdivia.
Look, we don't get half the baby, you get the full baby. If in fact we wanted a transition that was clean from the storm sewer operations going over to the water department, why can't we shift some of that burden and costs of storm drain over to water? I mean, what's the big deal? You say that we're not prepared for it. Well, why? And
It's not a function of being not prepared for it. Stormwater maintenance, storm system maintenance is really not a sewer function. And so those are restricted funds, and so the city's general fund is responsible for the stormwater collection and maintenance program. That's separate from our sewer collection.
The sewer fee that the water department charges does not include stormwater maintenance. It's not an allowable expense. We can, as a community, we could go to the, do we have to go to the ballot to do a stormwater fee? We do. We could go to the ballot and ask the public to assess itself a stormwater fee. Those ballot measures.
That's not what I'm asking.
I'm
just to be clear.
I was quite sure you weren't.
Yeah.
And you notice it's not on our recommendations either. Not even below the line. I didn't even bring it up.
Well, stormwater staff is $280.
The staffing is, as a general fund expenditure. We have historically probably crossed the line on what we did with stormwater. We are also now, so now that staffing is gone, a couple of those people perhaps might have been doing some storm drain. In the last year, we've been charging the general fund for it when we did it. But going forward, we not only need a couple of people, we need 4. So we've, at least, and we've put that on the board as 4 positions. We need 20. We need street people, we need street sign people, we need traffic signal people, we need all of the above. We are deficient in every category. And that's why below the line I put those 3 categories with the little whatever that is, to show that they all link together. I didn't put a dollar amount up because you could go anywhere from $100 to $2 million, and you wouldn't have enough to fill all of our need. But it's where we are, and we just have to have a function for stormwater at this point. We need to be able to account for it. So that's what we're recommending is the 4 people.
So Mayor, I have a few. So these, just to kind of follow up here, maybe I should have started with suggesting provide the council a definition of what stormwater drain operations are. Give me a kind of a, walk me through what that means, what's the definition, and what roles play here in stormwater staff.
Certainly, council member. Stormwater in itself is the management of the storm drain system. So you have water that comes down large channels. Some of them belong to the county. Actually, I should say it starts from sort of the local level, sort of starts in the hillside, rolls down into the local streets, works its way down along the curbs and gutters, and then into the larger storm drain systems. Some of them are below ground, majority of them are above ground, and then works its way into the channels and then feeds into the county larger storm drain system. By law, by the cities as an NPDES permittee, we are required to have a level of maintenance to manage those systems. Part of that is a cleaning that happens each fall before the storm season hits to ensure that debris and garbage is both out of the system so it doesn't work its way downstream and pollute our basins, but also so it helps with the efficient flow of that water to the extent that those systems are designed to handle that flow. So this will be the minimum number of personnel that we need to basically get in there. And as the city manager indicated, this is nowhere near enough, but we've got to start someplace. This will allow us to field basically 2 crews that can start to do some preventive maintenance and meet probably the very basic requirements of our stormwater permits.
And this is a federal law, NPDES is a federal law? Is that right?
Yes, it is part of the Clean Water Act, but administers through the state regional water quality control boards.
And so we're obligated to have these services. And do other cities, Mark, have it under the auspices and care of the water department?
No.
No. They're essentially public works.
They're essentially in public works.
It's part of the public works infrastructure, essentially everything within the right of way.
And I will tell you, because I've recently come from LA County, and so has Martin, and in fact Mark has as well, the new permits that are being issued are much more burdensome and onerous. You know, cities in the San Gabriel Valley, we're looking at millions of dollars per city to implement the new permit requirements, the required street sweeping and the required storm catch drain basin insets. And so again, you know, we're fortunate, but we better make sure that we're maintaining those as we look to a new permit, which I want to say will be coming up in the next couple of years. We're going to find that some of those same very burdensome restrictions that have been placed on LA County cities and Orange County cities are going to be moving into the Inland Empire. So we do need to get this program in place and understand what we're doing.
So 2 follow-up questions. Can stormwater staff be reconfigured in the community development department, or is it required to be in your department? And then second question, isn't there an offset from the DIF fees to pay for some of this?
No.
Well, in
Not
terms of
DIF fees.
Not DIF fees.
Go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of reconfiguring staffing, really it's a maintenance function. It's a maintenance function in effort. So I'm not necessarily sure that community development folks want to get out and do clean storm drains. And it really is geared towards what Public Works does. It is a maintenance function. In terms of development impact fees, I can let Mark talk
offset
about
costs. What offset costs are there, or how can we somehow? Is there a way to pass this on maybe to?
DIF fees will pay for infrastructure. It doesn't pay for the maintenance.
Runoff, okay.
I mean, by definition, it can't be used for maintenance.
So
but
this is
it will
primarily
pay-
maintenance.
It will pay for, DIF fees can be assessed for infrastructure. And I think Mark is up here. There is a position in his department that deals with MPDES permitting. Mark, do you want to address that?
Yeah, the reason I wanted to step in, I think what might help people is there's two pieces to NPDES, two major pieces. The one is capturing the water on site, and that's what community development does through the development review process. And then there's the second piece, which is once the water is in the street,
What do we do with it?
how that water gets cleaned before it goes into the catch basin. And that's why it's separated between community development and public works.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
that might help in
Yep.
the discussion.
Thank you.
Although
Appreciate
we'll
that.
appreciate it, Mark, if you come out and help Public Works clean the catch basin.
Sure, we'll send
Do
people
it.
out tomorrow.
Why not?
One more piece to that question, too, is you asked about the revenue side of the equation. There is a very minor amount of revenue that is a rate assessed on the citizens' utility bill from the water department that is passed through to us. It generates about $175,000 a year of revenue, and it's not even enough to pay the permit costs, I'm told. And so it's designed to be the NPDES fee, and there is the right to increase that to cover costs, but that's, again, but you'd ask, is there revenue? There is a source, and people do, sorry, people do assess NPDES fees, and they adjust that accordingly for the cost. It's like any other fee, but that's, again, it's not been touched since, I'm told, 1992, I believe. So.
Councilman Nichol?
Yeah, and to circle back with the question I had earlier regarding street sweeping, I assume there's a nexus between stormwater, the issue of ensuring that we aren't polluting.
Yes.
And the street sweeping services
Yes.
that we have. I mean, it's not just about having pretty streets. It's about removing debris, removing trash that cost us money and create pollution. So I see there is a nexus between what we're discussing right now in relation to stormwater, the issue that we finally getting back on track where we have some regularly scheduled street sweeping. My frustration has been, and I'm just speaking anecdotally on my street, is people park in the street.
Yeah.
We have cars that have been parked there for weeks in some cases. There's debris underneath the vehicles, and I watch the street sweepers wind their way down the street, missing, I would say, a good portion, if not half, of the debris on my street alone. And there should be a penalty for those people who choose to park their vehicle and cause us the cost of having to deal with that debris when it finally ends up in our storm drains. So to me, this isn't about whether or not people can afford it. This is about a real cost that is being incurred by our government, by our city, to comply with federal requirements. And if people don't change their behavior and contribute to the costs of stormwater cleanup and debris, then they should be penalized and they should pay a fine to compensate us and to go back into that fund potentially. So what I would like to do is have a conversation not just about having clean streets, but perhaps finding that nexus between this particular cost component of our budget and a street sweeping parking restriction fee fine penalty. So
I think that's exactly why you would enter into a program like this. I'm just telling you, and we can do that. And I already promised to bring back the policy discussion. There is nothing quick about implementing a program like that. It's going to take multiple years to implement.
I understand,
I've
but
done
it needs to be
before.
done.
This is a 60-some square mile city with 600 and something miles of streets. You'll just have to go into it gradually.
Yeah.
And the trouble with going gradually is it doesn't cover your overhead until you get way into the program. For a poor city, it's tough to do, but I'll tell you, when we have to redo our MPDES permit, they're going to tell us to do it. So we might as well get busy thinking about how to do it. But it's going to be a burden before it's a benefit.
I understand that, but we're at a point where we just have to bite the bullet now and get real about decisions, as uncomfortable or as inconvenient as they may be. We've got to turn the corner, and we just don't have time to waste.
No, but we got to get serious about revenue too then.
Absolutely.
Okay. Does that conclude Public Works?
Yeah. Next is community development. Oh, sorry.
Before we leave Public Works, this budget does also include some additional, albeit minor, but does include some additional costs that we've identified are needed for improved traffic signs and signals. We need to have a stock of supplies so we can respond more quickly when we receive complaints. Street signs and painting, we have a lot of areas that are not painted out. So again, it provides some additional support to our Public Works Department.
And that's a per year need.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
and we could use much more than this, but at least it's, we're trying to get to the point where we have more availability.
Councilman Nichol.
Yeah, and that does, I sent a link today. SCAG has a very interesting analysis called Revision. And just going through some of that data this afternoon in preparation for this discussion, what really stunned me was the fact that our city in particular, and I think probably because of the age of some of the infrastructure, especially in downtown, but the number of intersections we have in the city of San Bernardino compared to other cities around us. And I think it goes back to that idea that block sizes were much smaller 100, 150 years ago. And the number of intersections per square mile in some areas of the city is staggering. And I have to believe that there's, and I don't know how you address that, but that's a cost that we have that a lot of our newer cities around us don't. And I don't know if there's a solution. I'd be interested to discuss at some point. I don't know if you do street closures. I don't know if you create, I don't know. I don't know what you do to address that, but I would have to assume that in terms of maintaining that infrastructure, I'm sure there's probably collisions. There's other things that factor in all that over time that have a real cost. And like I said, it was just something that really kind of jumped out at me when I was looking at the data. And I don't know if there's a strategy we can look at, but it is something that we need to be cognizant of.
I think we need to look at issues like that. Cities are looking at closing streets in some cases, abandoning streets in some. The problem that's going to fight or is going to hit us before too long is that our traffic signals are so old. And traffic signals have a life. And they're going to start, they're already starting to go out. We're going to start having more and more expense on traffic signal replacement, and there is no funding for that that's put aside. So it is another one of those big challenges that an older city has. And we're going to have to look at creative solutions. They're not going to come easy on some of these issues.
Okay, thank you. Oh, she's tough. Community Development's next department. The programs have not changed between last year and this year: admin, planning, land development, building and safety, enforcement and beautification. The FTE count is proposed to be increased by 2. As the city manager discussed earlier, both those positions are planners, one transportation and one an associate planner. Associate planner is designed to largely be paid for through increased revenues just from the work that will be going on. And that's community development.
Councilman Nichol.
Again, getting to this idea of fee for service, I completely agree with the need that we need to step up the number of planners. And I'd like to just get your thoughts in terms of are our permitting costs sufficient? I mean, are there ideas that we might want to consider on the revenue side, you know, and I get plenty of complaints from people and say, well, it just takes too long to get something. And my response to them is, well, what if we charged you a bit more and we were able to maybe hire a couple more people? Would you be willing to pay that extra fee to get your plans or your project approved a bit faster? What are your thoughts? I mean, is that, I assume we could, in theory, maybe if we had a two-tier, or we had a, you know, I don't want to call it a concierge, but maybe, you know, a two-tiered system where, you know, if you want to, and I'm sure we'd charge expediting fees and so forth.
We do for plan check services, have an expedited fee. I think some of this conversation goes back to what the city manager was saying earlier with developers that have a certain level of sophistication. They absolutely recognize the link between the fees they pay and the service they get. And for larger projects, larger developers, time is more important than money. Mm-hmm. They need projects turned around very, very quickly. For the less sophisticated developers, and that is, you know, a large percentage of the people we deal with, there is a lot of hand-holding, which we are happy to do, but that does drag down the overall system because we've only got 3 full-time planners and a manager. So it is something that, you know, as has been mentioned here, the fee study will be coming forward shortly. We do need to right-size a lot of our fees. We're also looking at the building plan check fees as part of that overall process. So, yeah, long-term, as Mark had said, we do need, for a city of 65 square miles, a much larger staff. So I think incrementally we're going to get there.
Is there any example of a city that, you know, for instance, we bifurcated code enforcement because we felt there was a need to have some code enforcement or some degree of our code enforcement with a specialty more aimed toward law enforcement. That there was an advantage to having that bifurcated system. Might there be a similar argument to say maybe we need a bifurcated counter that says you have a counter for your less sophisticated, your local? It's, you know, I did a drywall project in my garage a couple years ago, and I was sitting next to a developer that had a multi-million-dollar housing development that he was waiting to see the same person at the same counter that I was. And I thought to myself, well, is that necessarily the best way to operate? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we do have a bifurcated system that I'm just not familiar with. But I would assume you might want to have some system that has some kind of a higher standard of service. And
I don't think it's that. I mean, like Mark, I've done a lot of this kind of work through my career. We don't have enough people to do that. It's interesting. Some building departments will say Thursdays are small project days. And you come in on Thursdays and we're going to sit at the table or at the desk with you, and we're going to pop out small projects. We're just going to, you know, that's all we do on Thursdays. We don't check anybody else's plan check. We just do this. We've only got one plan checker.
Correct.
So we can't bifurcate him.
Well, what I'm saying is if we had a desk that was just handled development, and it was paid for by the permits and the fees, and we probably charge a higher rate, and we say, look, you know, we've got a separate counter for you if you want to come in, or you can go to the regular counter. But obviously, it's you know, if you don't want to pay the cost that offsets that additional planner that's pretty much dedicated to large major projects, complex projects. I don't know. I'm just trying to think.
I think we should start with the, and it's not even on the board, but I think we should start with the idea of adding a second plan checker. We do other plan check. We do it. We contract it out. Some of the developers, and I'm sure you talk to them, don't want their project to go out. They want the project to stay in because if it goes out after it finally comes back, it still has to be rechecked by the internal plan checker. I suspect it's probably a higher priority than we've given it to add a second full-time plan checker. Plus, if the plan checker gets sick, then you've really got a problem. So that's probably the starting point. Yeah, you can have large project plan checkers, but my attitude about plan checking is as the work comes in, hire the team. Even if it's not in the budget. If all of a sudden we have a run on projects, which we haven't really had, but if it comes in, if it starts coming in like we hope it is, we'll go out and hire extra people even if it's out of budget, because you can't, it's like we talked about, you can't fail to provide that service. And we can commit to doing that. And maybe we need, before we come back the next time, let us have a further conversation to see if maybe we need to add something here that bolsters our plan check function. I don't think it's a process. I think it's really just a resource issue.
Thank you.
Councilman Nagel.
One more quick question. How is this code enforcement structure working?
I think overall it works well. It's a little confusing to the public. I think you've noted and a couple of other council members have noted. But the division was done for a couple of reasons, a couple that you've noted, Councilmember Nickel. Multifamily housing all falls under crime-free multifamily. So there's logic that the police department handles that. They also handle the illegal dispensaries. So again, that's, I think, the reason for that division. And then they're called community policing specialists in the police department. The code enforcement officers under community development do all the commercial enforcement as well as property that have 3 or fewer units.
Does it make sense to continue that? In other words, would it make sense eventually to think about maybe transitioning the enforcement component to the police department?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Why or why not?
Well, first of all, the police department already has so many functions that they're dealing with. I don't think we need to burden them with the administrative part of the enforcement. They're already involved almost by definition, but I don't think we need to add to them doing all of the enforcement from the 2 functions. I think they've got enough just to deal with what they've got. It's working. It works fine. We need the police involvement on the multifamily. The other part, and I wish we need to just call them something totally different because they're 2 different functions. And I think the code enforcement that's in community development is the more traditional code enforcement, and we need to get systems in place that allow us to strategically go after those priorities we've got instead of trying to go out on every complaint on every location in town. Our code enforcement people are like making calls every day. They go out to 15 different locations to respond to 15 calls that come in. That's no way to get to fundamentally change the nature of what your city is fighting. We need to, like with the discussion on homelessness, it doesn't solve the problem to house people overnight and feed them every day. It makes you feel good about your human services, but it doesn't solve the problem. Solving the problem is fixing the housing problem. Our code enforcement people are going around dealing with the symptoms of problems that we need to focus our time on fixing the real problem. You've talked about trying to get serious about dealing with the housing condition issue. I think that's where we need to put that effort. We've got code enforcement people out doing signage, and they're doing illegal vendors, and they're doing zoning violations, and they'll go out and talk to somebody who's got a property line dispute. I mean, they're all over the board doing a whole bunch of things. We need to put systems in place to deal with that so that we're not just constantly, we're just running in circles. So that's the thing that I think we need to do with the code and the community development part of code enforcement. The part that relates to the housing, multifamily housing, I think we got that in the right place with the right staff, and I don't want to make that burden bigger by giving them a bigger role on the enforcement on the other stuff. I think let's get that working first, and then let's talk about what else we do.
Anything else from code enforcement? For community development, sorry. Okay, we'll move on to Parks, Rec, and Community Services. Again, the divisions and programs are the same as in prior years. There's been a recommended increase in the FTE count of 2, adding a cemetery worker and adding a special events coordinator. Another change in personnel is reclassifying 1 deputy director from a community recreation manager. Additional allocated costs that are being proposed are to put $60,000 more for part-time recreation positions. Would have a service enhancement, which Jim could talk about in a moment, and another $30,000 for maintenance of outdoor facilities, including pools, also again to shore up something that desperately needs attention.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate our Parks and Rec for their great work in our community. I only have 2 parks. If you count the 3rd Mill Park, which I have expressed publicly and privately that I am willing to entertain a public-private partnership. I think those are opportunities. Mark, you and I have talked about Mill Park.
Yep.
There at Foisey and Central.
Yep.
If we could get some other collaborators on board with selling some of that property off, that's a real opportunity for us to create jobs on that corner. I do have a problem. I haven't thoroughly. I wanted to call you, Jim, over the weekend, but I do also have a family to attend to, and I have at the very outset, I'll probably want to talk to you a little bit more about some of your increases in costs for staff and whatnot. But at the outset, I do have a problem with increasing more staffing costs. I don't really see the nexus or the benefit for community, especially when we're in tough times. I do respect your department. I just I probably need some more information. I'll talk to you more offline through the city manager's office. But
what staffing costs? Because there's not much.
You have a cemetery worker, special
Yes.
events coordinator, and what other issue? Part-time staff for $60,000. So
Yeah, those are the increases. The cemetery worker, you probably understand, is Pioneer Cemetery, which is, we got to do something about that. I think, to me, that's something we just have to do. I don't think that there's a whole lot of discretion there, although the council could say, no, let it go. But I don't know how you do that. The special events coordinator.
what is that for? Who uses that?
Right now, when people come in, we have people come in to do events all the time.
Okay.
And right now, there is no central coordination of that at all. It's done all over the city, department by department. People will, when they come in, I'm just going to use this as an example. I'm not picking on the car show. I think the car show is great. But when the car show wants to do its event,
Meaning
they'll go
Route
to
66?
Route 66. They'll go to Public Works to talk about street closures. They'll go to police department, what kind of staffing they need. They'll go to Public Works about the streets they need to close. They go to each individual department and they negotiate their own fees with each individual department. That's the history of how it's been done in this city. If we have somebody who will coordinate that through one central point, we'll save time in all of those departments, and we'll get fee structures that will pay for the programs. We won't have departments agreeing to do things for free anymore, which has been kind of historic and process, not just on the car show. I'm talking about a lot of things. I think this is an effort to put a system in place that allows us to be more efficient, that will then get more out of all of our departments because they won't be tied down doing all this stuff in every corner of the city. So that's why it's there. We can charge at some point when the council looks at the fees, we can establish a permit fee for special events that would pay for some part of this. Wouldn't be a high fee, but it would pay for some part of it. So that's why that's recommended.
Well,
And those are really the only two full-time positions that are added.
And that other position will also help the frustration that people feel when they're trying to do events running around all the city departments. So it's also intended to help with customer service.
Absolutely.
so I think you can subcategorize special events coordinator with an economic engine component here. For instance, our Route 66, arguably, one could say, we need a coordinator so we can book all of our hotel rooms. I mean, there's a reciprocal kind of effect here that if we were to employ a special events coordinator, that the benefits are that they're going to fill up their gas tank, that they're going to shop here local, that they're going to eat local, that they're going to use hotel, and that we're going to benefit from TOT. Could the special events coordinator maybe not necessarily be housed in the public, or what do you call it, parks department, but more within the division of the economic development department as an economic kind of benefit rather than a parks? I don't know if there's somehow, I don't see the correlation with parks.
You know, the correlation for me is that by far the best special events person in this organization is Cynthia Alvarado, and she would supervise that position.
I've never experienced the work of Cynthia Alvarado. I don't
well,
really
that's why I'm the city manager, is because I'm supposed to know the players. And I'm telling you that in this organization, she's head and shoulders the best special events person we've got. There's no magic to why. I've had that function in the city manager's office in the past. I've had it associated with filming in LA County cities. So there's no magic to where it goes. I put it there because Cynthia's got the talent to be able to do it. And there's no further talent or no further rationale other than that.
So I appreciate it, Mark. I just don't see, I don't think I can support that. Thank you.
Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I support both, and this is why. And I'll start with the cemetery. The cemetery is located in the First Ward. Daily, I get calls from constituents whose loved ones are there. My gravesite is so messed up. What are you planning to do? We need somebody full-time. About 2 weeks ago, we had a community day of service, which was well attended by over 200 people, but I can't have them at that same location once a month. I was just lucky to have them there. I do have a question on the scope of responsibility for this full-time cemetery worker. They would be exclusively assigned there, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Right now, we have a part-time park maintenance worker that's picking up the responsibilities, but again, he's actually a retiree, so he's only 20 hours a week. And then we're complementing his efforts with park staff, which is currently taken away from our ability to do some of the things that we need to do in the parks. So the full-time staff member, cemetery staff member would be out there on a daily basis.
40 hours a week?
40 hours a week. He would be able to, the cemetery is set up on it's on a manual watering system. So you basically have to stick sprinklers in the ground just like they used to do when we were in high school. So to expect a 20-hour-a-week employee to be able to water that entire cemetery more than once a week there's just not enough time for one person to do that. So a full-timer with the help of a part-timer would be able to make sure that the cemetery is getting watered adequately, which is going to help with the trees. It's going to help with the presentation and just the overall quality of the representation that we present out there as far as from a maintenance standpoint. It'll also take away the burden on our parks maintenance department on days that we have burials, because that'll be one full-time staff member that we don't have to pull from our parks maintenance staff to assist with the burials and the services that take place out there. And those services, although it's not a daily or even weekly happening, sometimes we'll get 3 or 4 in a month, sometimes we'll only get 1 or 2 in a month, but it still has a significant impact on the parks maintenance staff not having a full-time cemetery
It becomes a
worker out
workload
there.
issue.
Right.
Not to mention some of the other issues that have come to my attention, such as vandalism, graffiti, illegal dumping, and we need somebody full-time to do this. I also support the special events coordinator position because this person would be directly responsible to coordinate the Veterans Day event, which last year attracted 2,500 people, the Cinco de Mayo event, which we had last Saturday, and the CID prom, which we had last Saturday. So I believe that the special events coordinator would be the person who would oversee this whole thing. It would be responsible to take care of everything for the city.
Yeah, it's the regulatory function.
Right.
It doesn't mean they're running the car show. It doesn't mean they're running the Veterans Parade. It means they're providing the regulatory function that the city would do for its role.
Right.
Setting the fees, coordinating with the departments.
And it would be the point of contact.
Yes.
As opposed to coming here, coming to Public Works, calling my office, calling Community Development.
One place.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, the slide, did we fix the one that's up on the board? Does it say it's 3 positions or 2? Okay, I've got an old copy, sorry.
So it's 2?
Only 2. Two net new positions.
Thank you.
Councilman Nichol.
I was just curious, when it comes to the cemetery, it's sort of an oddity that we have in terms of our Parks Department. Although it's not uncommon for some cities to have city cemeteries, so it's not completely unknown. But I know Riverside, they have the Evergreen Cemetery. It used to be called Nevergreen because they had so many maintenance problems, but they did figure out a way to turn it around. But it seems like it's a discussion we have every year, and I personally think it's not a good enough word, but it's unfortunate that we constantly have these maintenance challenges. It is a historic place for our city and our residents. Is there What is the plan eventually with that? Are we going to keep it indefinitely? Are there mechanisms that we could roll that into a trust or something eventually, or create a not-for-profit with some kind of endowment that would support it? Or is this always going to be a line item on our budget that we're constantly struggling to figure out how we're going to maintain something that...
More than likely. The cities that own cemeteries own them forever because there's no one who's going to take it over. No one can buy it to develop it. Nobody. Sometimes a city, if you had many people with interests in the cemetery, if there were people with family members there, you could conceivably try to create some kind of a endowment with a trust that maintains it. There are cemetery districts that cities establish where the public, but in California you have to vote to establish it. So the voters would have to vote to establish a cemetery district, and they would pay for it through their property tax. In Clovis, California, where I started my career, they have a cemetery district, and for years there's been a charge on the property tax to pay for the cemetery. So that's how it sometimes is done. But going from pure ownership to establishing a mechanism where the voters agree to charge themselves for it is very difficult to do, and not high on the priority list of things you want to go to the ballot over. So it doesn't tend to happen. For the most part, cities end up with cemeteries for a long, long time. Not much you can do with them.
How many? What is the? How much space is left there for additional burials?
There's not many. We're pretty much out of sales. We're out of plots. The only burial plots that get sold are the ones that get resold somebody gets refund, you'll see, and some of the budgets, you'll see negatives on the cemetery plots. That's because we've provided refunds, and then we do resell those. Pretty much, we're at the point of just doing the burials and doing the services. There's not a lot of potential for revenue, if that's what you're getting at, for future sales. There's, as that comes up, what we're working on reestablishing and reevaluating what our costs are, or what our charges are going to be for the burial sites as they come available or re-available. We're going through a cost study right now because what we're charging for cemetery plots right now is what they were charging 35 years ago. So we are reevaluating that with our cost studies, and hopefully we can start to, as we can sell some of the lots, we can start to generate some revenue to offset what our costs are.
All right, thank you.
Do you have a plot?
We have a family plot, actually, up in Northern California. We bought 25 years ago. We're all going to be buried there.
Any other council members?
I'm going to the Veterans. Free over at Riverside.
Well, but you were born in this town, so
Well, but it's...
maybe you'd like to...
Nobody wants me anymore.
Oh, Fred. Thank you.
We really want you to.
Right on the desk here.
Any other questions on Park and Rec? Okay, this is the last one. Thank you. It's non-departmental. It's a long list of things that don't naturally fit into other departments, and as we provided the detail for you, you can see there. I don't know if you have any questions about anything. You may have lots of questions, but it's designed just to give some transparency to what's in that fund, and that's... one thing I did want to point out is that this is where we've historically been funding the bankruptcy administration costs. We've made an intentional decision this year to not put any more of those costs here because we have to move forward. It's likely we will have some costs past July 1, but the bankruptcy fund you've heard it talk about is where we're going to assess that, as it kind of puts a control point on that, and that we have to basically live within those means to make it, from here to the end zone line, if you will. And so that's an intentional decision to basically free up those costs to do other administrative things. Unfortunately, most of it out of the gate went into increased PERS costs, but other than that, that's the only real change here.
One thing we might point out is this final payment of the CDBG penalty. The good news about those dollars is that after we pay them, they go back into our program revenue to be spent again as CDBG. But this is the last year of the general fund payback of that previous penalty.
Councilman Nichol.
A couple quick questions. So the bankruptcy fund, which department is that under?
It's not really a department. I guess it's the city manager probably. Then it's not a budgeted expenditure. It's just the funds we've set aside, the money that came from Burtech when they bought the equipment, and then a franchise fee that's been moved over to track separately to be able to account for all the costs associated with bankruptcy.
Are we going to get
We're treating it
anything?
as if it's a fund.
Yeah.
Okay, but that Burtech revenue is revenue that was realized last year? Yes, that $12 million was paid in April or so of 2016. Okay.
So we'll continue to get the Burtech revenue.
Yes, well, those funds were one time, which is why they were a good match for BK costs, but ongoings that are part of what you see here. But in terms of the cost, it's not like you were asking a question of getting an update on those funds or how that fund.
Yeah, well, I just want to be able to have some transparency in terms of the accounting for that and the money that came in. And then going through your list here, just a couple quick items. We have debt payments for City Hall, Police Station, 201 building, pension bonds. What is the outstanding debt and what are the payments on City Hall?
There's three debt issues in this kitty of payments. The first one it's new this year because we're in 17-18 because we're going to restart payments on the pension bonds, and that's about $1 million due June 1, 2018. And so that's $1 million of that 2.6. The balance is the 1996 and the 1999 certificates of participation that, and I don't have it all in my mind spread out exactly, but debt service on those pieces, it pays for piece of City Hall, pays for City Hall, pays for the 201 building, pays the South Valley and the police station, yeah. I'm trying to think, do you have any details that would be more helpful?
Yeah. I have got that question, and I haven't been able to provide an answer yet in terms of what the balance owed on City Hall specifically is.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah, that's easy enough to do.
I'd like to get that, and what the debt payments are on that annually. In terms of general legal settlements, where are the funds for the settlements that we enter into? What department, or is it a multitude of departments?
Multitude. If it's workers' comp, we have a workers' comp fund. If it's of late, if it's general liability settlements, those are coming out of the bankruptcy fund, because that's all still being handled through the umbrella of bankruptcy. Sorry. But generally speaking, we have a general liability fund also that will go back into play once the BK issues are resolved.
And will that be non-departmental?
No, that's part of Human Resources budget. They have HR administration, but they also have the risk management function, which is workers' comp and general liability as well.
Okay. And on that general liability, that covers all of our settlements?
Yeah, in our claims that we pay on, yeah.
Okay.
If it turns into a lawsuit, you have a settlement, that's where that would come from too.
And
yes.
After we're out of bankruptcy, do we anticipate any change in terms of the demand on that fund, since we'll be out of bankruptcy?
In the last few years, the demand has been very light because we've had a stay on claims or suits, which has been helpful in that regard. And again, those that are being handled through BK, we should see a significant drop in the total outstanding claims through the process that we're going through. But as we turn the spigot back on in the new fund, it'll be a factor of what claims we incur, obviously, but and how successful we are in addressing those claims. So it's kind of a tough question to answer, really, but I think it's a bit of a question we all have as well, is what's going to be the right amount of money to budget for that, and this next year will be the first time I think we begin.
Because it looks like we haven't really changed from last year's budget on liability and risk management.
Correct.
So we don't anticipate that there'll be any change.
There was no reason to increase this point in time, but again, as the year progresses, and if we have bad experience for some reason, part of mid-year conversation with you will be, hey, here's what's going on. And again, you would see things, of course, in closed session, too, as it's going along. And if we got to that point, we'd want to talk to you in advance of mid-year, not just wait for mid-year. But at the same time, we hope things happen well.
Do we know what the pre-bankruptcy amounts were?
We certainly have data. I don't have that here now, but what the claim levels were, I don't know if we know anything.
And it's also difficult to put a specific number or an amount, because claims are very difficult to assess. All you have is a claim with not much information until you get into it, which usually we are not into it per se.
I'm just trying to assess what our costs were before we entered into bankruptcy. Obviously, bankruptcy has changed that equation considerably, but I would like to see maybe a few years prior to when we filed for bankruptcy to see if we might have some sense of what that number might turn out to be.
Yeah, we can do that.
I can tell you also that what I think is very important, and we've already started a conversation about how we can reduce our risks across the board, from our policing efforts to our liability for trip and falls and all sorts of things like that. It needs to be looked at closely, because if we can, of course, we need to reduce our exposure. And we've already started that conversation, but it's not an easy, quick process that we can engage in. We're talking about across the board at the city, so it's going to be a difficult process, but we're aware of it, and we've started that process.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilman Barrios.
Just wanted to know why $1.7 million is going to Kohl's department stores.
Sure. That is, we have a sales tax sharing agreement with Kohl's. I'm not sure how many years it goes back, but many, many years ago, when they were coming into the city, it was negotiated that we would share everything above the $500,000 mark of sales tax revenue we generate from their location. Part of it was also that they agreed to put in place the procedures such that all the sales from their, I believe it's Western region, are assigned to their location here in San Bernardino. So we're getting sales attributed here, which generates higher revenue for us, but also then in exchange for that, it was agreed to share that. And it's been an 80-20 relationship. They get 80, we get 20 of everything over 500,000. But last year we hit a $2 million threshold that was significant because that dropped it to a 70-30 split. So it worked in our favor that way.
I have a question on the authorized full-time positions. The 746 that's on the page identified as City San Bernardino authorized full-time positions by department, all funds.
Yes.
So that includes not just the general fund.
Correct.
It would include gas tax.
Correct.
So most of what we've discussed earlier was the general fund?
Yes. Largely, yes.
And this would include the successor agency personnel and the 746?
Yes.
So from the general fund standpoint, approximately how many employees is that covering?
Do you?
Yeah, the vast majority.
Dixon can do some magic and find that for us.
Okay. And any, does that include any part-time, or is this all full-time?
This would be all full-time positions.
All full-time positions. Thank you.
Part-time beyond this.
We don't, with part-time, we just budget dollars, and then if you may pay one person $20,000 or may pay two $10,000 each, that kind of thing. So it's department by department how they wind up using the dollars. So it's not really an FTE count, it's just a dollar allocation.
And of the 746, how many do we have?
How many are
actually
filled?
Employed? Yeah.
A little over, so 100.
615, 616.
So we have about 120, 130 vacancies.
We still have quite a few vacancies, yes.
More than that filled right now. A little over 600.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Although the rate at which we're filling positions is much better now than it had been.
Yeah, I want to double check that number. I've got a sense that it might be a little higher, but in the police department, we've got quite a few that are unfilled, both 62. So right off the bat, that takes us down to 680. And then there's other vacancies, but it's not that many that I think it's a little higher in the 600s. I sure hope.
And Dixon said of that 746, 626 are assigned to the general fund.
626?
626.
And Dixon, the bulk of the others are where? Gas tax. So they're paid for with gas tax. So they're people in public works that are doing gas tax eligible work. And some of them would be CDBG.
It's also things like IT is a separate non-general fund.
IT is a separate
15
fund.
positions out of the gate there. And so it's that's almost a little misleading because they're allocated back to the general fund then. But
yeah, that's mostly allocated back to the general fund. Yeah.
Like 99.9%.
Thank you. Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, Mayor. Brent or somebody, the League of California Cities, is that our annual fee to them?
Yes.
For membership?
That's all it is.
If there's an opportunity, I really would like to advocate for IEEP, Inland Economic.
We absolutely have to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's only a $10,000 commitment.
Yeah, it's not a lot. I saw him the other day and I promised him we'll get that paid.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I really have been studying more opportunities on how and why we should be a partner with IEP, and I think it's a good win for us. I think the mayor, you sit on an advisory committee. I think it's useful for, I think, I don't know, but that's what I had heard.
I want to
But
say
it's important.
it is,
city.
and they have carried our membership
Yes.
through bankruptcy without charging us.
Right.
We
But
never did.
I don't sit on anything.
Yeah, we never left membership because they carried us without fee.
It's important, and we're not paying. Certainly would love to, I think it's a very useful benefit. The Jones and Mayer, what is that for?
Those are the
About
final-
halfway down?
Yeah, those are the final costs related to the charter implementation that were approved by the by the council.
Charter implementation and legal
The
services?
legal services related.
By
to
Jones
that.
and Mayer. All right. And what is this SB Depot? What is that, for $300,000?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I can't, I've tried to.
That's the maintenance costs we incur for our share, our half of the San Bernardino, or Santa Fe Depot. We have maintenance costs associated with that.
And
So is that ongoing? That's just passed to us?
Yeah.
As a host city?
And we own half the...
some years ago, the city council agreed to pick up a portion of the cost of maintenance of the depot. In return, we're half owners of that property. And then we also, it's not on here because we haven't got a dollar amount yet, we are also going to have costs for our share of the maintenance of the new transit center. And that's another thing that was agreed several years ago that hasn't yet been charged, so we haven't gotten the first invoice. But those are two agreements that I will say, I'm told, and we're going to get evidence of this, that the agreements we're going to have are the same as other cities up and down the line have with, the agreement is with SB CTA. You know what I'm talking about. Sandbag,
It's the
right?
San Bernardino County Transportation Authority.
Yes, that's who it's with. And they will get us copies of the agreements that they have with other cities up and down the line to show that we're doing the same deal that others have. The depots may be a little different because we're actually half owners of that facility.
So, for the last, I don't know, you've heard me say this, we need to get in there with our parking fee structure and see if we can't charge them. Other cities are doing it up and down the line. Why not us? Why do we hesitate to move on revenue? Put the parking meters out on the public street. Do it.
I'm okay
Go
with
for
it.
it and do it. Let's get it done.
All right, put
And
it
then
on the
also
list.
that the parking structure, pass the fee on to just because we're the county seat doesn't mean we also have to be saddled with $300,000. I mean, God bless our partnership with Metrolink, but at the end of the day, we need to make money, and we're not doing it.
Yep.
And I've said this for 2-3 years now. Let's look at putting parking meters. Let's revisit that parking structure. Let's do it. Let's get it done.
I'm an old parking meter guy. I'd love to bring that report in.
All right, thank you.
Okay. I think that wraps up the PowerPoint.
Yes.
I think what I would recommend that we do at this point is let me tomorrow give you a list of all of the different questions that have been asked tonight and all the follow-ups you've asked for. It's quite a list, which is good. I'm glad. And I'll get that out to you tomorrow. And the staff will then figure out what it takes to address those issues and how we schedule that. We do need that next workshop, and we're going to work on what date that's going to fall on. I call it the CIP workshop, but we can deal with some of these questions too. And then when we come back and do the budget hearing, we can talk some more about that. If we need another meeting in between that and adoption, we can do that. Whatever the council needs to be comfortable before we ask you to adopt it, we'll do whatever we need to do. And I'd suggest maybe that's a wrap for tonight. I could go into the whiteboard, but I think we've pretty well exhausted the questions. And let me put those into a list, and then we'll follow from there.
I only have one public speaker Dottie Garcia, but I don't see her here. Is there anyone else from the public that would like us? Don't see anybody else coming forward. All right, we thank the staff and council for the dialogue this evening. Look forward to the next workshop, which will include CIP. This meeting then is adjourned until 2 p.m. Monday, May 15th. Thank you.